Iceberg by Clive Cussler. The United States Coast Guard patrol plane was 4 hours, 20 minutes into a dull and routine 8-hour iceberg surveillance and charting mission in the North Atlantic. In the cockpit, Lieutenant Sam Neth, with 4 of the crew members, piloted and navigated the huge 4-engine Boeing aircraft, while the other 6 crewmen took up office in the cargo section, eyeballing the radar scopes and other scientific instruments. Neth turned the plane on a sweeping arc, settling the nose on a straight course toward the Newfoundland coast, when one of the crewmen spotted something unusual. "I have a weird reading, sir. 18 miles, bearing 347. Judging from the configuration and size, it's a berg, but my signal is much too strong for ordinary ice." "Well, very well, we'll have a look-see." Neth circled the iceberg 3 times, moving closer and closer until the walls of the berg towered above the plane. He became aware of something now, something indistinct, something that slowly materialized into a tangible thing, a man-made form. He pressed the mic switch. "Sloan, did you see it?" "I saw it, but I didn't think it was possible." "Neither did I, but it's down there. That's a ship, a goddamn ghost ship embedded in the ice." Another crewman came through over the headphones. "Excuse me, Lieutenant, for what it's worth, the overall length of that thing in the berg is in the neighborhood of 125 feet. Neth grunted. "Well, a derelict fishing trawler, most likely. Shall I contact district headquarters in New York and request a rescue party?" Neth shook his head. "No need to rush a rescue ship. It's obvious there are no survivors. We'll make a detailed report after we've landed in Newfoundland." There was a pause. Then Sloane's voice came through. "Make a pass over the berg, Skipper. I'll drop a dye marker on it for quick identification." At Neth's spoken command, Sloane tossed a gallon pickle jar full of red dye out into space. Peering back, Sloane could see a bright vermilion streak spreading slowly down the 1,000,000-ton mound of ice. Neth seemed almost jovial. "Right on the button. The search party won't have any trouble spotting that one." Then, suddenly grim-faced, he stared down toward the spot where the unknown ship lay entombed. "Poor devils. I wonder if we'll ever know what happened to them." When the Coast Guard patrol plane had disappeared, the towering iceberg once again lay enshrouded in deathly stillness. Then suddenly there was a slight but perceptible movement on the ice. 2 men in white snowsuits rose to their feet. One of them brushed away the ice on a small radio transmitter and receiver. Extending the 10-foot telescopic aerial, he set the frequency and began turning the crank handle. He didn't have to crank very hard or very long. Someone, somewhere, was keeping a tight watch on the same frequency, and the answer came almost immediately. Lee Koski, Lieutenant Commander of the Coast Guard's newest supercutter, the Catawba, watched the bright yellow helicopter as it swept through the mist, headed into the wind, and approached the Catawba in the driving rain. Lieutenant Amos Dover, the Catawba's executive officer, stood beside Koski and watched in amazement. "That pilot must be extremely dumb or dead drunk or both to even consider touching down." Defying the odds, the pilot dropped the copter neatly onto the landing pad. Koski turned to Dover. "Their credentials had better be first-rate. Offer them my compliments and then bring them to the officers' mess." Koski was sitting at a table in the officers' mess room when the door opened and Dover entered, followed by a chubby character with large, rimless spectacles mounted on a bald head that was edged by long, unkempt white hair. The stranger marched up to the commander and extended his hand. "Commander Koski, I take it. Honeywell. Dr. Bill Honeywell, sorry to inconvenience you like this." Koski rose and shook Honeywell's hand. "Welcome aboard, Doctor. Please sit down, have a cup of coffee. Where's your pilot?" He'll be along in a minute." Koski wasn't smiling. "It was pure recklessness on the part of your pilot to even consider making a flight in this weather." I can assure you, sir, that the trip was necessary. You, your crew, your ship has a vital function to perform, and time is the critical dimension. We cannot afford to lose a single minute." He pulled a slip of paper from his breast pocket and passed it across the table to Koski.
While I explain our presence, I must ask you to set an immediate course for this position."
Koski took the paper without reading its contents.
"Forgive me, Dr. Honeywell. I am not in a position to grant your request. The only order I have from the Commandant's headquarters is to take aboard 2 passengers. Nothing was mentioned about giving you carte blanche to run my ship. Just what is your capacity? Why are you here?"
My Ph.D. is in oceanography, and I'm currently employed by the National Underwater and Marine Agency.
"No offense, Doctor, but that still leaves one question unanswered."
"Perhaps I can help clear the air."
Koski turned to a figure who leaned nonchalantly against the doorway. A tall, well-proportioned figure. The oak-tanned face, the hard, almost cruel features, the penetrating green eyes suggested that this wasn't a man to step on. Clad in a blue Air Force flight jacket and uniform, watchful yet detached, he offered Koski a condescending grin. Honeywell made the introductions.
"Commander Koski, may I present Major Dirk Pitt, Special Projects Director for NUMA."
Pitt moved to the table and sat down, leaning close to the 2 Coast Guard officers. "Okay, gentlemen, here's the story. The position Dr. Honeywell gave you is the approximate location of an extremely important iceberg, one that has the remains of a ship embedded under its mantle. It's a Russian trawler, to be exact, crammed with the latest and most sophisticated electronic detection gear Soviet science has yet devised, not to mention the codes and data for their entire Western Hemisphere surveillance program. 6 months ago, a Russian trawler bearing the name Novgorod rode just a few miles off the Greenland coast and kept watch over the activities at the U.S. Air Force missile base on Disco Island. Aerial photographs showed that the Novgorod carried every electronic reception antenna in the book and then some. And the Russians played it cool. The trawler never strayed within Greenland's territorial limits. And most Russian spy ships are relieved of duty every 30 days, but this one maintained its position for a solid 3 months. The Department of Naval Intelligence began to wonder at the long delay, and then one stormy morning, the Novgorod was gone. And there are only 2 routes the Novgorod would have taken home to Mother Russia. The British and Norwegians have assured us that the Novgorod took neither. In short, somewhere between Greenland and the European coast, the Novgorod disappeared with all hands." Koski's lips twisted in a sarcastic grin.
"You're asking me to buy a Soviet spy ship locked in an iceberg? Come on now, Major."
Pitt matched Koski's grin. "Be that as it may, it was one of your own patrol planes that spotted a ship matching the outline of a trawler in an iceberg at 47 degrees 36 minutes north, 43 degrees 17 minutes west."
"It's true, the Catawba is the closest rescue ship to that position, but why haven't my orders to check it out come direct from District Command in New York?"
"That's cloak and dagger stuff. The last thing the boys in Washington wanted was a public announcement going out over the radio. Now, the idea, of course, is to go over the trawler before the Russians have a chance to catch on. And I think you can appreciate, Commander, how invaluable any secret information concerning the Soviet spy fleet is to our government."
"If you don't mind my saying so, Major Pitt, it would seem more practical to place investigators on the iceberg who are skilled in electronics and intelligence interpretation. A pilot and an oceanographer don't make much sense."
Pitt looked penetratingly at Koski.
"That's a false front, but one with a purpose. The Russians couldn't help but become suspicious of military aircraft milling about an area of open sea where few, if any, ships ever travel. On the other hand, National Underwater and Marine Agency aircraft are commonly known to conduct scientific projects in desolate waters."
"And your qualifications?"
"Well, I'm experienced at flying a helicopter in Arctic weather, and Dr. Honeywell is, with little doubt, the world's leading authority on ice formations."
Koski nodded.
"I see. Dr. Honeywell will study the berg before the intelligence boys crash the party."
Honeywell nodded.
"You have it, Commander. Yes, if that really is the Novgorod under the ice, it's up to me to determine the most expedient method for entering the ship's hull."
Koski noticeably relaxed.
"Lieutenant Dover, kindly oblige these gentlemen. Lay a course for 47 degrees 36 minutes north, 43 degrees 17 minutes west, full ahead. Then signal District Command in New York of our intent to depart station."
Pitt chimed in.
And can you please notify the NUMA office in Washington that Dr. Honeywell and I have arrived safely on board the Catawba and will continue our flight to Reykjavik when the weather clears? Koski raised an eyebrow. Reykjavik, Iceland? Pitt nodded. That's our final destination. Dover showed Pitt and Honeywell to their quarters. As soon as Dover left them alone, Honeywell groaned loudly. We will both be in front of a firing squad when the Coast Guard sees through that incredible yarn you told about the missing Russian trawler and realizes we flim-flammed them out of the use of one of their new cutters. Well, we had to have a base of operations to refuel, and the Catawba was the only ship in the area with the necessary facilities. The next morning, Pitt and Honeywell met Commander Koski in the bridge control room. Honeywell was at the chart table. Here it is, gentlemen, the precise location of our ghost ship, give or take a few square miles. What do you figure for the flight distance? Pitt asked. Approximately 90 miles to the general vicinity. Koski looked at Pitt. Well, how long do you need before we rendezvous? 3.5 hours should do the job. Koski looked thoughtful. Well, 4 hours, and after 4 hours I'm coming into the ice pack after you. Well, thank you, Commander. Believe me when I say I'm grateful for your concern. Honeywell had to shout above the racket of the helicopter's engine exhaust. I don't like it. We should have sighted something by now. Pitt looked at his watch. No, time-wise, we're in good shape. There's still over 2 hours to go. Well, we must find it today, Major. Tomorrow may be too late for a second try. Honeywell checked his chart again. 200 square miles covered, nothing achieved. The minutes wore on and multiplied, and the fatigue began to show in the deepening lines around Honeywell's eyes. Pitt gripped his arm. Just hang in there, Doc. Our elusive iceberg may be just around the next corner. If it is, it's defied every drift pattern in the book. The red dye marker could be washed away in the storm yesterday? Fortunately, no. The dye takes weeks, sometimes months for the stain to melt away. In a few moments, Honeywell suddenly stiffened in his seat and leaned forward. Binoculars jammed against his eye sockets. I have it. Pitt didn't wait for command. He dipped the helicopter and headed toward the direction indicated by Honeywell's binoculars. Honeywell shook his head. I can't understand that. That berg shouldn't be there. By every known law of current and drift, it should be floating at least 90 miles to the southeast. Pitt suddenly became aware of a dim, almost imperceptible shadow in the water. I'm afraid we have some uninvited guests. They're coming to the party through the basement. A submarine? A submarine. Honeywell's mouth twisted. Well, then the Russians beat us to it, dear God. We're too late. No, not yet. We can be standing on the ice in 4 minutes. It'll take the sub at least half an hour to reach the berg. With any luck, we can find what we came for and get the hell out before their crew lands. Pitt watched Honeywell probe the ice 30 feet away from the helicopter. The Russian submarine, now riding motionless on the surface, lay a quarter of a mile away. Time's running out, Doc. Any luck yet? No, nothing. The derelict must be deeper than I thought. He rammed the probe feverishly into the ice. No, it's here. It's gotta be here. A 125-foot vessel couldn't have disappeared. Pitt peered through the binoculars. A large 6-man dinghy was inflated, dropped beside the hull, and boarded by a group of men carrying an assortment of automatic weapons. They're coming, 5, maybe 6 of them, armed to the teeth. My God, man, don't just stand there and gawk. Help me search for the derelict. Forget it. They're going to be here in another 5 minutes. Damn it, if we could only just locate the derelict's hull, we could at least destroy it with thermite bombs and keep it out of the Russians' hands. Honeywell was startled to see Pitt looking at him with apparent indifference. Tell me, Doc, what's today's date? The date? It's Wednesday, March 28th. We're 3 days early for April Fool's Day. Somebody's played a tremendous joke on us and those clowns out there. There's no derelict in this iceberg. As a matter of fact, there never was one. Total incomprehension and the meager beginnings of hope touched Honeywell. Go on. Besides radar contact, the crew of the patrol plane reported that they sighted the outline of a ship in the ice, yet we saw nothing before we touched down. That alone doesn't figure. Someone removed the red dye from the iceberg containing the lost ship and spread more of the same over a decoy 90 miles off the track. Who's playing games? Obviously it isn't the Russians. They're as confused as we are. Well, at the moment, Doc, it doesn't matter. The important thing is to bid fond farewell to this floating ice palace and fly off into the blue. Our uninvited guests are about to arrive. By 11:15, they had found the derelict. Pitt put down directly on top of it. Pitt sniffed the air. "You smell that, Doc? Burnt rubbish." Hunnewell tilted his head back and inhaled slowly. "Well, where's it coming from?" Pitt nodded at the derelict under his feet. "Oh, where else but down there?" There's no way. It's a scientific fact. You can't smell an inorganic substance inside a block of ice from the outside. I suggest you stop playing Bloodhound and start placing the thermite charges. The only way we're going to get inside the wreck is by melting the ice mantle. "I'm sorry, my friend, you're dead wrong. The labor has already been done." Pitt pointed dramatically upward. Along the outer edges and near the lower base, the ice was smooth and even. But beginning at the summit and working downward into the middle of the slope, the ice was as pockmarked as the backside of the moon. Hunnewell turned back to Pitt. "Well, now it does appear that someone went to an awful lot of trouble to remove the Ice Patrol's red dye stain." "Yeah, I'll lay a month's wage that our clever little pals did more than merely chip ice. They most certainly found a way to enter the derelict." "You're suggesting there's a camouflaged cover over some sort of ice tunnel?" "Well, the thought had crossed my mind." "Well, let's get on with it then. If we stand around here theorizing much longer, my testicles will get an acute case of frostbite." It was Pitt who stumbled upon the first sign of a tunnel. He called Hunnewell over. "It's a slick piece of work, Doc. The entire circumference of the entrance cover is beveled, a perfect match with the surrounding ice. If someone hadn't gotten careless and cut a small hand grip, I'd have walked right over it." Pitt raised a round slab of ice 3 feet in diameter by 3 inches thick, revealing a crudely carved tunnel barely large enough for one man to crawl through. A powerful, acrid stench of burnt paint, fabric, and fuel, mingled with torched metal, rose from the opening. Pitt passed a spare flashlight to Hunnewell. "I'll go first. Give me 5 minutes before you follow." The tunnel ran downward for 20 feet, stopping at the blackened steel plates, charred and bent, of the hull. The smell by this time was so strong that Pitt found it an effort just to breathe. He could only wonder at the white-hot temperatures responsible. Hunnewell soon joined him, and they patrolled the charred ruins together. Hunnewell shook his head as if coming out of a trance. "We'll find precious little here that's of any use to us, Major." "We'll find nothing. What the fire left, our unknown friends have undoubtedly picked clean. Let's see what they've been up to." Their senses began to adjust to the overpowering stench and the grotesque, carbonized surroundings, but they weren't the least bit prepared for the hideously misshapen form they found on the deck. Hunnewell dropped his flashlight in horror. "Good God!" "Well, Doc, if that lump of ashes on the deck is any indication of things to come, we should find at least 14 more just like it." "Yes, you're right. The ship sailed with 6 crewmen and 9 passengers, 15 in all." Together they made their way into the bowels of the derelict. Everywhere they went, their eyes were laid on the same horrifying spectacle of death. By the time they discovered the 13th and 14th bodies in the wheelhouse, Hunnewell's stomach was slowly becoming immune. "That's about it, Major. We found them all except the man we came for." "They were all charred so far beyond recognition he could have been any one of them." "Well, but he wasn't. The right body won't be too difficult to identify, at least not for me. I knew our quarry rather well, you know." Pitt's eyebrows raised. "No, I didn't know." "Was no secret, really. The man we've lied, schemed, and risked our lives to find, unfortunately, as it probably turns out, dead, attended one of my classes at the Oceanographic Institute 6 years ago. A brilliant fellow. A pity if he ended like this." "Well, how can you be certain you'll be able to tell him from the others?" "By his rings. He had a thing about rings. He wore them on every finger except his thumbs." "Well, rings don't make a positive identification." "There's also a toe missing from the left foot. Will that do?" "It would, but we haven't found a corpse that qualifies. We've already searched the entire ship." "Not quite." Hunnewell pulled a rough diagram of the vessel from his pocket. There was one place left to look, an isolated compartment directly beneath them. There they found a barely discernible pile of charred bones. Hunnewell carefully brushed away an area of the remains and found several small pieces of distorted metal. "Not proof positive, perhaps, but about as certain as we'll get." He handed the fused bits of metal to Pitt, who held them under the beam of his light. Hunnewell shook his head sadly.
All that's left of Christian Fury. Genius, adventurer, scientist, legend. The 10th richest man in the world before he was 25. A kind and gentle person, totally untouched by his fame and wealth. Pitt heard movement on the deck above. He nerved himself for an act of defense, but it was too late. A powerful light beam played into the room, blinding his eyes in its blazing glare. "Robbing the dead, gentlemen? By God, I do believe you two are capable of most anything." The face was hidden behind a light, but the voice unmistakably belonged to Commander Koski. Koski and Dover came forward. "You've lied since the moment you set foot on my ship, Major. What in hell is coming off?" "You've seen most of the ship?" Pitt asked. Koski nodded. "Do you recognize it?" "Impossible. What's left to recognize? It was a pleasure craft, a yacht. That much is certain. Beyond that, you can flip a coin. What are you leading up to?" "The Lax. Ever hear of it?" Koski nodded. "The Lax disappeared over a year ago with all hands, including its owner, the Icelandic mining magnate Christian Fury. Christ, half the Coast Guard searched for months, didn't find a sign. So what about the Lax?" "You're standing on it." Pitt aimed his flashlight. "And this cremated mess is all that's left of Christian Fury." Koski's eyes widened and the color drained from his face. "I've never seen anything like this. It can't be. A ship this size couldn't vanish without a trace for nearly a year and then pop up burned to a cinder in the middle of an iceberg." Hannawell looked at Koski in bewilderment. "It would seem that it did just that." Koski thought a moment. "Wait, there's one more important factor no one has considered." "Which is," Pitt prompted, "the final course of the Lax." "There's nothing strange about that. It was in all the newspapers. Fury with his crew and passengers left Reykjavik on the morning of April 10th last year, laid a direct heading for New York. He was last sighted by a Standard oil tanker 600 miles off Cape Farewell, Greenland, and after that, nothing more was seen or heard of the Lax again." "That's fine as it goes, Major, except the sighting took place near the 50th parallel, too far south of the iceberg limit." "It would be most helpful, Dr. Hannawell, if you'd explain how an iceberg appeared where none existed, then with the Lax frozen in its clutches, ignored the prevailing currents for 11.5 months, and then cruised 4 degrees north while every other berg in the Atlantic was drifting south at the rate of 3 knots an hour." "I can't." "You can't. The plain, simple truth is that it's impossible." Pitt frowned. "Look, Commander, up to an hour ago, Hannawell and I were following a precise plan. That plan is now out the window. Look, I'll tell you what we know. After that, you're going to have to draw your own conclusions." "You could have leveled with me sooner." "I couldn't take the chance. The story I concocted on the Catawba was true up to a point. The point where I substituted the Novgorod for the Lax. Fury's yacht, of course, wasn't carrying classified electronic equipment or any other clandestine mechanical devices, for that matter. The cargo actually consisted of 8 Major League engineers and scientists from Fury Mining Limited, who were on their way to New York to open up secret negotiations with 2 of our government's largest defense contractors. Somewhere on board, probably in this room, was a file of documents containing a geological survey of the ocean floor. What Fury's research team had discovered under the sea or where remains a mystery. This information was vitally important to a great number of people. Our own Defense Department desperately yearned to get their hands on it, and so did the Russians. And they pulled out all the stops to grab it. Pitt then briefly told Koski and Dover about the iceberg decoy and meeting with the Russian submarine. And now this fire, which takes the whole situation out of the mysterious and puts it in the category of the macabre. Koski looked at Pitt warily. "You mean the fire wasn't accidental?" "That's right. We're talking murder. With a capital M. It's all just too perfect. The radio operator in the radio room, 2 engineers in the engine room, the captain and a mate on the bridge, the passengers in either their staterooms or the salon, even a cook in the galley, everybody exactly where he should be.
What in the hell kind of a fire would sweep through the entire ship, roasting everyone to a crisp without their making the slightest attempt at self-preservation? Well, what do you have in mind for the cause? A flamethrower. Honeywell stared at Pitt blankly. I can't believe that everyone just stood like sheep and let themselves be turned into human torches. Don't you see? Our fiendish friend somehow either drugged or poisoned the passengers and crew. But where did the killer go after setting the fire? Koski asked. For that matter, Honeywell said, I wish someone would kindly explain where the murderer materialized from in the first place. I mean, he obviously wasn't one of the passengers or crew. The Lax sailed with 15 men, and it burned with 15 men. I mean, logic dictates that this was the work of a team who boarded from another ship. Koski disagreed. Any boarding of one ship by another requires some sort of radio contact. Even if the Lax had picked up survivors from a phony shipwreck, the captain would have immediately reported it. Dover looked at the grisly remains on the deck and quickly turned away. God, what kind of maniac could murder 15 humans at a sitting? Pitt watched the jagged, snow-packed peaks of Iceland grow on the horizon, and the water below the helicopter turn from the deep blue of the great ocean depths to the rich green of the inshore surf as they passed over a tiny fishing village. Honeywell awakened from a light sleep. Oh, how far to Reykjavik? Another half hour. Honeywell reflected on the day's events. Well, the only real fact that we didn't tell the commander was the name of Feary's discovery, zirconium, atomic number 40. I barely squeaked through my geology class, Doc. Why zirconium? What makes it worth mass murder? Purified zirconium is vital in the construction of nuclear reactors because it absorbs little or no radiation. Every nation in the world with facilities for atomic research would give their eye teeth to have it obtainable by the carload. Admiral Sandecker is certain that if Feary and his scientists did indeed discover a vast zirconium bonanza, it was under the sea, close enough to the surface to be raised economically. Well, that's a hell of an undertaking. The problems of raising raw ore from the sea bottom are immense. Yes, but not insurmountable. Feary Limited employs the world's leading experts at underwater mining. That's how Christian Feary built his empire, dredging diamonds off the coast of Africa. Pitt noticed a dark speck in the sky, several thousand feet higher. After he made a fortune beyond his wildest dreams, he turned the whole business over to the native stockholders, set up a black administration that could run efficiently without him, and took the next boat back to Iceland. Pitt was watching the solitary dark speck in the northern sky turn into a sleek black jet aircraft. Did he have a family? No, his parents died in a fire when he was very young. All he had was a twin sister. I don't really know much about her. Feary put her through finishing school in Switzerland, and so rumor has it she later became a missionary somewhere in New Guinea. Apparently her brother's fortune meant nothing to... Honeywell never finished the sentence. He jerked sideways, facing Pitt, his eyes staring blankly, his mouth open in surprise, but no words coming out. Pitt barely had time to see the old man slump forward, limp and dead to all appearances, as the plexiglass bubble encircling the cockpit shattered into 1,000 jagged slivers and fell away. Twisting to one side and throwing up an arm to protect his face from the blasting wall of cold air, Pitt momentarily lost control of the helicopter. Its aerodynamics drastically altered. The Ulysses nosed sharply upward, almost on its end, throwing Pitt and the unconscious Honeywell violently against their back seats. Unable to match the helicopter's slow speed without stalling, the mysterious jet soared forward and swung around in a 180-degree turn for another assault. Pitt struggled to bring the helicopter on a level course, a near impossible task with a 200-mile-an-hour airstream tearing at his eyes. The black jet swept by again, but this time Pitt was ready for it. He pulled the Ulysses to an abrupt horizontal stop, raising the light craft in a straight vertical climb. The dodge worked. The pilot of the jet roared under Pitt, unable to bring the machine gun to bear. Pitt didn't kid himself. There was no escape. The battle was too one-sided. A grim smile wrinkled around his eyes as he lowered the copter to a bare 20 feet above the water. Victory was hopeless, but there was a slight chance for a tie score. Pitt steadied the small, defenseless craft and hovered as the jet dove like a concrete bird directly above him. The gunner, laying prone and firing out an open cargo door, laid down a steady stream of shells, waiting for the narrowing gap to carry them into the path of the helicopter. The barrage of death was only 30 yards away now. Pitt braced himself for the impact and threw the Ulysses straight up into the attacking plane, the helicopter's rotor blades shattering as they sliced through the jet's horizontal stabilizer. Instinctively, Pitt flicked the ignition switch off as the turbine engine, without the drag from the rotor, raced wildly amidst the howl of tortured metal. Then the racket stopped, and the sky was silent, except for the wind that whistled in Pitt's ears. He snatched a glance at the strange jet just before it crashed into the sea, nose first, its tail section hanging like a broken arm. Pitt and the unconscious Honeywell weren't much better off. All they could do was sit and wait for the crippled helicopter to drop like a stone nearly 70 feet into the cold Atlantic water. When the crash came, it was much worse than Pitt had anticipated. The Ulysses fell on its side into the Iceland surf in 6 feet of water, a scant football field's length from shore. Pitt's head whipped sideways and glanced off the doorframe, sending him into a vortex of darkness. A farmer named Munson and his oldest boy, Bjarni, carried Honeywell to the Land Rover. Pitt rode in the back, holding the oceanographer's head in his lap. Honeywell moaned softly. Pitt leaned over him. The old man was conscious now. His eyes rolled and stared at Pitt. He gripped Pitt's hand and in a strained effort murmured, "God save thee." Then he trembled and gave a little gasp. Dr. Honeywell was dead. Pitt closed the glazed, sightless eyes and smoothed the few long strands of white hair. The farmer stopped at a small cottage on the outskirts of a village of white farmhouses. A somber little man with thick, steel-rimmed glasses came out, introduced himself as Dr. Johnson, and, after pronouncing Honeywell dead, led Pitt into the cottage where he stitched and bandaged Pitt's 3-inch head gash and made him change into some dry clothes. Later, as Pitt was drinking a strong brew of coffee and schnapps forced on him by the doctor, the door opened and 2 men walked in. They stood calm, efficient, and very official in their police uniforms. One nodded a greeting to the doctor, and Pitt suddenly got the entire picture. "You needn't have been secretive about calling the police, Dr. Johnson. I have nothing to conceal from anyone." "No offense, but Dr. Honeywell's arm was obviously mangled by gunshots, and the law is explicit. I must report all bullet wounds." Pitt didn't like it much, but he had little option. Only one of the policemen appeared to speak English. He did all the questioning. "Were you the pilot of the helicopter that crashed, sir?" "Yes." Pitt noticed that the policeman had dirty fingernails and was dressed in a uniform that left his wrists and ankles showing. "Your name and the name of the deceased?" Pitt answered the question and was struck by the fact that neither policeman made an attempt to write the information down. There was something funny about all this. "Gentlemen, I have committed no crime against the people of Iceland nor broken any of your laws. I will answer no more questions until I am taken to the American consulate in Reykjavik." "I am sorry, sir, but you force us to take you to our headquarters for further interrogation. There you will be free to call your consulate." "First, officer, would you mind identifying yourselves?" "I do not understand. Why should we identify ourselves? It's obvious what we are. Dr. Johnson can vouch for our authenticity." "There is no doubt as to your official capacity, gentlemen," Dr. Johnson said, "but Sergeant Arnenson usually patrols our village. I do not believe I have seen you come through our village before." "Well, Arnenson had an emergency call in Greenwood. He asked us to answer your call until he could arrive." Johnson smiled at the policeman almost diffidently. "Forgive me, gentlemen, I haven't quite finished with the Major's head wound. I have 2 more stitches to insert. If you please, Major." He motioned Pitt back into the examining room, closing the door. "Those men are imposters. What is happening? I do not understand." 16, maybe as many as 19 men have died, Doctor, and the killing will probably go on. I'd guess Sergeant Arnenson was the latest victim. You and I are next. Pitt glanced outside. "Where can we go?" "Their car and Munson's truck are in front of the house. They'd easily cut us off before we could open a door." Johnson grinned faintly. "Our only alternative is to fight. It's going to be difficult taking a life after spending 30 years trying to save them." "Do you have any firearms?" "No, the only equipment I possess which might be classed as weapons are my surgical instruments." Only 2 more minutes had elapsed when Johnson opened the door to the examining room,
revealing Pitt parked on a stool holding a bandage to his bleeding head. Johnson motioned to the man who spoke English. "Could you please assist me for a moment? I'm afraid I need a third hand." Johnson, keeping any suspicion at a low level, purposely left the door slightly ajar, but not enough to allow vision of more than a fraction of the examining room. "If you could hold the Major's head on a slight angle with both hands, then I can finish without interruption." It was all over in less than 4 seconds, silently. Pitt reached up his hands and grabbed the man around the wrists. Surprise showed for a brief instant in the stranger's face, then true shock as Johnson clamped a heavy gauze pad over his mouth and jammed a syringe against his neck in the same movement. The man made a desperate effort to hurl himself backward, but his wrists were held solidly in the vice of Pitt's grip. Then the eyes turned upward, and he quietly collapsed into Johnson's arms. Pitt quickly knelt down and pulled a service revolver from the unconscious man's belt holster and stepped softly to the door. As soundless as he was swift, he lined up the gun and jerked open the door. For a second, the other man sat there in stunned immobility, staring at Pitt in the doorway. Then his hand shot to his holster. "Freeze!" Pitt ordered. The command was ignored, and a shot blasted through the small waiting room. The gun flew from the bogus policeman's hand as Pitt's shell tore into the wooden grip, taking the thumb along with it. The paid killer stared in shocked pain at the bloody half-inch stump where his thumb had been. Then he advanced towards Pitt. Pitt pulled the trigger and the .38 bullet smashed into the man's left leg just above the knee. The paid killer slowly sank to the floor, his left hand clutching his torn left leg, trying to stem the blood flow. "Please do not kill him, Major," Dr. Johnson implored. "His life is not worth the burden on your soul. I beg you, let me have the gun. He can cause you no further harm." Pitt slowly handed the revolver to Johnson and nodded. Johnson took it, put his hand on Pitt's shoulder as if in secret understanding. "I will take care of these two and contact the authorities immediately. You go with Munson to Reykjavik and rest. Stay in bed for at least 2 days. That is a direct order from your doctor." Pitt smiled crookedly and threw a last salute at Dr. Johnson as he turned and stepped down the front steps to the road and Munson's waiting Land Rover. "Good morning, Dirk. I'd almost lost hope you'd ever wake up." Pitt looked up into the smiling brown eyes of a long-bodied girl who sat on a chair at the foot of his bed. She pushed the long strands of shining fawn-colored hair behind her ears. Then she stood up and walked around to the head of the bed. She wore a red wool dress that clung to her precision-shaped hourglass figure. She wasn't exactly beautiful in the exotic sense, but she had a pert attractiveness that melted every man she met. She touched the bandage on the side of his head. "Oh, you've had a nasty time. Does it hurt much?" "Only when I stand on my head." Her name was T.D. Royale, and she was Admiral James Sandecker's private secretary. Pitt pulled himself into a sitting position. "If you're here, it could only mean the Admiral is close by." 15 minutes after he got your message over the consulate's radio, we were on a jet to Iceland. He's pretty shaken about Dr. Hunnewell's death. Admiral Sandecker blames himself." "Well, he's going to have to stand in line. I got there first." Pitt threw back the covers and was halfway through the motion of pushing himself to his feet when the room swayed as though it was made of rubber. T.D. stepped forward abruptly. "Please, Dirk, your head isn't ready for your feet yet." "Well, no, it's nothing. I just stood up too fast." He made it to his feet and lurched into her arms. "Well, you'd make a lousy nurse, T.D. You get too involved with your patients." "Well, you're the one patient I would love to get involved with, Dirk." She held on to him tightly and made no attempt to remove her arms. "But you never seem to notice me. There are times when I doubt whether you know I exist." "Oh, I know you exist, all right, but you're the Admiral's personal secretary. I respect that old guy. He's much more than just a friend or a boss. I won't cause complications behind his back. Now, why don't you be a good girl and scrounge me up a change of clothes?" Exactly 2 hours later, Pitt sat across a desk from Admiral James Sandecker. The Admiral looked tired and old, far beyond his years. "Your story, Dirk. Let's have it." Sandecker heard Pitt out and then said, "God save thee?" "That's what he said?" "Yeah, that's all he said. Then he was gone."
I'd hoped Dr. Honeywell might have offered me a clue to the whereabouts of the lax between the time it vanished and the time it became embedded in the iceberg, but he volunteered nothing except an historical sketch of Christian Fury and a lecture on zirconium.
Well, he did as he was told. I didn't want to get you involved.
That was 2 days ago, Admiral. Now I'm up to my neck. Let's have it, you sly old fox. What in the hell's going on?
All right, then.
Sandecker leaned back in his swivel chair and puffed several times on his cigar.
Well, this is what took place as far as it goes. Too many pieces are missing for even a 50% glimpse of the overall picture. Almost a year and a half ago, Fury's scientists successfully designed and constructed a nuclear undersea probe that could identify 15 to 20 different mineral elements on the ocean floor. During tests off Iceland, the probe detected and measured mineral samples of manganese, gold, nickel, titanium, and zirconium. The zirconium in huge and unheard-of amounts.
Well, yeah, I think I see. Without the probe, the zirconium would never be found again. The prize, then, is not the rare elements, but rather the probe itself.
Yes, the probe opens a vast and untapped frontier for undersea mining. Whoever owns it won't control the world, of course, but possession could lead to a direct reshuffling of private financial empires and a healthy shot in the arm for the treasury of any country with a continental shelf containing a rich storehouse of minerals. Well, the thing about Fury, he was a visionary, a gentleman who wouldn't step on an ant or a flower. He knew the far-reaching good the probe would bring to mankind. He also knew what unscrupulous interests would do to exploit it once the probe fell into their hands. So he decided to turn it over to the nation that he was certain would make beneficial and charitable use of its potential. He was scheduled to meet with the president and present him with the probe.
Isn't it possible for American engineers to develop our own probe?
Yes. In fact, we already have one, but compared with Fury's probe, it operates with all the efficiency of a bicycle next to a sports car.
Any ideas on who stole the probe?
None. It's obviously a well-financed organization. Beyond that, we're playing blind man's bluff in a swamp. The National Intelligence Agency is positive no foreign government is in the act, and it's gotta be a private motive. For what purpose besides financial gain, we can't even guess.
All right, so the mysterious organization has the probe, so they strike a bonanza on the sea floor. How do they raise it?
Well, they can't. Not without highly technical equipment.
It doesn't make sense. If they've had the probe over a year, what good has it done them?
They've put the probe to good use, testing every square foot of the continental shelf on the Atlantic shore of North and South America, and they used the lax to do it.
The lax? I don't follow.
Do you remember Dr. Len Matajic and his assistant, Jack O'Reilly?
Pitt frowned, recalling. Yeah, I airdropped supplies to them 3 months ago when they set up camp on an ice floe in Baffin Bay.
Well, Matajic and O'Reilly are now dead. The plane bringing them back from the ice floe crashed in the sea. No trace was found.
That's strange. I hadn't heard. It must just have happened.
A month ago yesterday, to be exact.
Why the secrecy? Nothing was in print or in broadcast about their accident. As your special projects director, I should have been one of the first to be informed.
Only one other man besides myself was aware of their deaths, the radio operator who took their last message. I've made no announcement because I intend to bring them back from their watery grave.
Sorry, Admiral. You've lost me completely.
All right, then. 5 weeks ago, I received a signal from Matajic. Seems O'Reilly spotted a fishing trawler that had moored to the north end of their ice floe. He returned to base and informed Matajic, and then together they trudged back and paid a friendly call on the fishermen to determine if they needed assistance. An odd bunch, Matajic said. The ship flew the flag of Iceland, yet most of the crew were Arabs, while the rest represented at least 6 different countries, including the United States. Now, it seems a bearing had burned out in their diesel engine, and rather than drift around while repairs were made, they decided to tie up on the ice floe to let the crew stretch their legs. The captain and crew invited Matajic and O'Reilly on board for dinner, and this courteous act seemed harmless enough at the time. Later, it was seen as an obvious attempt to avoid suspicion. By sheer coincidence, it backfired.
So, our 2 scientists were also on the list to see something they shouldn't have.
You guessed it. Some years previously, Christian Fury had entertained Dr. Honeywell and Dr. Matajic aboard his yacht.
The exterior of the trawler had been altered, of course, but the instant Magic stepped into the main salon, he recognized the ship as the Lax. Now, if he'd said nothing, he and O'Reilly might have been alive today. Unfortunately, he innocently asked why the proud and plush Lax that he remembered had been converted into a common fishing trawler. It was an honest question, but one that had cruel consequences.
They could have been murdered then and there, and their bodies weighted and dropped into the sea. No one would have ever known.
The newspapers forgot the Lax 1 week after it disappeared, but 2 men in a government research station? Not likely. The press would have exaggerated and harped on the enigma of the abandoned ice station for years. No, if Magic and O'Reilly had to be eliminated, there were less conspicuous methods.
Shooting an unarmed plane out of the air without telltale witnesses, for example?
That appears to be the pattern. It wasn't until our 2 scientists had returned to their base camp that Magic began to have doubts. If the ship earned its keep as a fishing trawler, where were the fish? Even the distinct aroma had been missing. He got on the radio and contacted me at NUMA headquarters, told me the story along with his suspicions, and suggested that the Coast Guard make a routine investigation of the trawler. I ordered them to stand by while I sent a supply plane north to return them to Washington as quickly as possible to make a detailed report. I was too late. The captain of the trawler must have monitored Magic's message. The pilot made it to the ice floe and picked them up. After that, the 3 of them vanished.
Enter the same black jet that shot at us, I'll wager.
Exactly.
How did you handle the search party?
I notified all search and rescue units in the Northern Command that a valuable piece of equipment had fallen off a NUMA research ship and was floating around lost. I gave out the course the plane would have taken and waited for a sighting report. There was none. I also waited in vain for the sighting of a trawler matching the hull design of the Lax. It, too, had disappeared.
And that's why you were dead sure it was the Lax under the Iceberg.
Let's just say I was 80% certain. I also did a bit of checking with every port authority between Buenos Aires and Goose Bay, Labrador. 12 ports recorded the entry and departure of an Icelandic fishing trawler matching the Lax's altered superstructure.
I see. A northern fisherman would hardly troll southern waters. Working the undersea probe is the only credible explanation.
If you're wondering why NUMA is mixed up in this instead of sitting on the sidelines and cheering on the National Intelligence Agency and their army of super spies, the answer is, or I should say was, Hunnewell. He corresponded with Fury's scientists for months, offering his knowledge toward the ultimate success of the probe. Only he had a rough idea of what the probe looked like, and only he could have safely disassembled it.
That, of course, explains why Hunnewell had to be the first aboard the derelict.
Yes. The probe operated by briefly exposing the metallic elements to neutrons given off by a laboratory-produced element called Celtinium-279. Celtinium, in its refined state, is very unstable. Under the right conditions, it can explode with a force equal to a 50-ton phosphate bomb, but with a pronounced characteristic difference. Celtinium fulminates at a very slow rate, burning everything in its path to ashes. Yet, unlike more common explosives, its expansion pressure is quite low. It could go off and melt, but not shatter a pane of glass.
Then my flamethrower theory was a bust. It was the probe that went off and turned the Lax into an instant pyre. Sandecker smiled.
You came close.
But that means the probe is destroyed.
Sandecker nodded, his smile rapidly fading.
All of it. The murders, the probe, the killer's search for undersea treasure. It went all for nothing. A terrible, terrible waste.
It's possible that the organization behind this affair has the design and plans for the probe in its possession.
It's more than possible. A lot of good it'll do them. Hunnewell was the only person on Earth with the process for Celtinium-279. As he often said, it was basically so simple he kept it in his head.
Oh, the fools. They murdered their only key to constructing a new probe, but why? Hunnewell couldn't have been a serious threat unless he found something on the derelict that led to the organization and its mastermind.
Sandecker shrugged helplessly.
I haven't the vaguest idea. Any more than I can guess who the unseen men were who chipped the red dye marker off the iceberg.
God, I wish I knew where in the hell to take the next step.
I've taken care of that little matter for you.
Pitt looked up skeptically.
Oh, there's a girl I want you to meet. She just happens to be the loveliest woman north of the 64th parallel and, I might add, the wealthiest.
Oh, really? What's her name?
Kirsty Ferry. Christian Ferry's twin sister.
A few days later, Pitt, Sandecker, and Teedy met at Reykjavik's most elegant restaurant to have dinner with Kirsty Ferry. Pitt's eyes roamed the room. So, Admiral, where is this exciting creature I've heard so much about?
Miss Ferry should be along any minute.
You know, just before we were attacked, Hunnewell said that Ferry's sister was a missionary in New Guinea.
Yes, little else is known about her. In fact, few people knew she even existed until Ferry's will named her sole beneficiary. Then she appeared at Ferry Limited one day and took the reins as smoothly as if she'd built the empire herself. She's shrewd, just as shrewd as her brother was.
Why do I get the distinct impression that I'm supposed to play Prince Charming? Pitt asked. Sandecker waited until the waiter was several tables away before answering.
Let me explain something. Nearly 40% of NUMA's projects are designed and planned around mining the sea floor. Russia leads us by a wide margin in surface programs, but lags badly in deep submersibles, a damned vital piece of equipment for undersea mining. This is our strong point. We want to maintain this advantage. Our country has the resources, but Ferry Limited has the technical knowledge. With Christian Ferry, we had a good, close working association, and now that he's only a memory, I don't care to see the results of our efforts lost just when our programs are on the verge of hitting pay dirt. I've talked to Miss Ferry, and all of a sudden she's very noncommittal. Says she has decided to reevaluate her firm's programs with our country.
Well, you said she's shrewd. Maybe she's holding out to the highest bidder. There's nothing in the book that says she has to be as magnanimous as her brother.
That's right. And since I have to be in Washington the day after tomorrow, that gives me enough time to smooth the way for you.
With, Miss Ferry?
With Ferry Limited. I've arranged an exchange program. I'm taking one of their top engineers with me to the States to observe and study our techniques, while you're to stay here and report on theirs. Your primary job will be to restore the close relationship we once enjoyed with Ferry's management.
If this Ferry broad has been so cool toward you and NUMA, why did she consent to meet us tonight?
Out of courtesy. Dr. Hunnewell and her brother were good friends. His death and the fact that you made a gallant attempt to save his life played on her feminine emotions. She insisted on meeting you.
And I can't wait to meet my new boss face to face. Sandecker nodded.
You can in precisely 5 seconds. She just walked in.
Pitt turned, and so did every other male head in the restaurant. She stood in the foyer, very tall and very blonde. Her statuesque figure was encased in a long, violet-colored velvet dress. She caught Sandecker's wave, and she walked over to the table, moving with a graceful, flowing motion. Pitt pushed back his chair and rose and studied her face as she approached. It was her tan that intrigued him. The delicately clear, tanned complexion somehow seemed foreign to an Icelandic woman, even one who spent a good portion of her life in the back country of New Guinea. Admiral Sandecker took her hand and kissed it.
My dear Miss Ferry, I'm honored that you could dine with us. May I introduce my secretary, Miss Teedy Royale?
The two women exchanged polite greetings. Then Sandecker turned to Pitt.
And this is Major Dirk Pitt, the real driving force behind my agency's projects.
So, this is the brave gentleman you've told me so much about, Admiral. I'm deeply sorry, Major, for the tragic loss of Dr. Hunnewell. My brother thought very highly of him.
Pitt nodded. We're sorry, too. There was a pause while they looked at each other, Kirsty Ferry with what might have been more than friendly interest. If I'm staring, Miss Ferry, it's because Admiral Sandecker failed to warn me that the head of Ferry Limited had such mystic eyes.
I have been paid compliments by men before, Major Pitt, but you are the first to describe my eyes as mystic.
The eyes are doors to the secrets a person hides from within.
And what deep dark shadows do you see lurking within my soul?
Pitt laughed. Well, a gentleman never reveals a lady's private thoughts. Admiral Sandecker cleared his throat.
See no reason for an old man to sit here while he's starving, particularly when there's several square yards of delicious-looking food sits begging for attention only 10 feet away. Excuse me.
Kirsty smiled.
Please allow me to introduce you to our native buffet dishes.
The varieties of fish seemed endless. They returned with their plates heaped with near over-the-rim helpings.
I see you've taken a fancy to our cured shark meat, Major.
Yeah, I've heard a great deal about the processing, and now at last I have a chance to try it.
Kirsty's lovely eyes showed a flicker of surprise as Pitt ate several slices.
You're eating it raw, you know.
Pitt forked another slice into his mouth. Is there any other way? Sandecker cast a distasteful eye at the shark meat.
Dirk's hobby is gourmet cooking, Miss Fury. He's an expert on international seafood preparation.
Actually, it's quite good, Pitt said. However, I do think the Malaysian version has a better flavor. See, they cure the shark meat wrapped in a seaweed called echidna, and this gives it a slightly sweeter taste than the Icelandic delicacy. The rest of the meal was eaten with everyone relaxed and comfortable in the atmosphere of friendliness and good food. 2 hours later, Kirsty began to make apologies for an early departure.
My fiancé has insisted on taking me to a poetry reading tonight.
Admiral Sandecker beamed a felicitating smile.
My sincerest wishes for your happiness, Miss Fury. I had no idea you were engaged. Who is the lucky man?
The Admiral held his composure exceedingly well, Pitt thought. He knew the old man was stunned right down to his shoe soles. This new development would call for a different set of ground rules. Already, Pitt found himself wondering what the competition was like.
His name is Rondheim, Oscar Rondheim. My brother introduced us in a letter. Oscar and I exchanged pictures and corresponded for 2 years before we finally met.
Sandecker stared at her.
I think I know of him. Isn't he the one who owns an international chain of canneries? Rondheim Industries, a fishing fleet the size of Spain's navy?
That's right. His executive offices are right here in Reykjavik.
All his fishing boats, they're painted blue. Flying a red flag with an albatross? Pitt inquired. Kirsty nodded.
The albatross is Oscar's good luck symbol. Do you know his boats?
I've had occasion to fly over them. Of course Pitt knew the boats and their symbol. So did every fisherman of every country north of the 40th parallel. Rondheim's fishing fleets were notorious for wiping out fishing grounds, almost to the verge of extinction, robbing the nets of the other fishermen, dropping their own distinctive red-dyed nets inside the territorial boundaries of other countries. The Rondheim albatross carried as much respect as the Nazi swastika. Sandecker smiled a little too broadly.
A merger between Ferry Limited and Rondheim Industries would result in the most powerful empire.
Pitt's mind was running along the same channels. Suddenly his train of thought was broken when Kirsty waved her hand.
Oh, there he is, there.
They turned and followed Kirsty's gaze to a tall, snow-haired, distinguished-looking figure vigorously stepping toward them. He was fairly young, late 30s, his face strong and lined by years of ocean gales and salt air. The eyes were cool blue-gray. Pitt mentally wrote him down as a sharp and cunning opponent. He made a note never to turn his back to him. Rondheim stopped before the table, his even white teeth flashing in a seemingly cordial smile.
Kirsty, darling, how delightful you look tonight.
He affectionately embraced her and then turned to Tiddy.
Ah, and who is this lovely young lady?
Kirsty smiled.
That's Admiral Sandecker's secretary, Miss Tiddy Royale. May I present Oscar Rondheim?
Miss Royale. He made a slight bow. I am charmed by such interesting eyes. Pitt had to hold his napkin to his mouth to muffle the laughter. I think this is where I came in. Tiddy began to giggle, and Sandecker joined in with a hearty laugh. Pitt kept his eyes on Kirsty. He was intrigued by a frightened, almost panicky expression that flickered across her face before she forced a thin smile and went along with the surrounding mirth. Rondheim didn't go along with it at all. One didn't need to be a mind reader to see that he wasn't in the habit of being laughed at. Kirsty hurriedly introduced Sandecker.
It is indeed a pleasure to meet you, Admiral. Your reputation is widely known throughout seafaring circles.
The Admiral shook Rondheim's hand and turned to Pitt.
Major Dirk Pitt, my Special Projects Director.
Rondheim paused a moment, making a coldly professional assessment of the man standing before him before he extended his hand.
Major Pitt.
Rondheim placed his hand on Kirsty's neck and shoulder.
Come, darling. Max is reading his new anthology tonight. We must not be late.
His hand tightened, and she closed her eyes.
I hope you good people will excuse us.
Sandecker smiled.
Yes, of course. It's been a very enjoyable 2 hours, Miss Fury. Thank you for joining us.
Before anyone could say anything further, Rondheim hooked his hand through Kirsty's arm and led her from the dining room. Pitt pointed a finger in their direction. Well, there's your reason behind Fury's sudden reluctance to cooperate with the United States and NUMA. That man is no dummy. Once he marries Kirsty Fury, control of 2 of the largest privately owned corporations in the world will come under one roof. The possibilities are immense. I mean, Iceland and its government are too small. They're too dependent on the future Fury-Rondheim cartel for its economy to offer even a token resistance against a highly financial takeover. Then, with the right strategy, the Faroe Islands and Greenland, giving Rondheim virtual control over the North Atlantic. After that, one can only guess in which direction his ambitions lie.
You're assuming too much, Sandecker said. Kirsty Fury would never go along with an international power play.
She'll have no choice in the matter, Admiral.
A woman in love is blind, is that it?
No, I don't think this is a match based on love. Teedy nodded. Dirk's right. She was terrified of him. Didn't you see how he clutched her neck? I guarantee she'll be wearing high collars for the next week until those bruises disappear. Oh. Sandecker studied Pitt's face.
Would you humor an old man and tell me what's running through that agile mind of yours right now?
A black airplane resting beneath a watery death shroud. Pitt left the restaurant that night convinced that he could somehow link Rondheim to the black airplane that had killed Hunnewell. The next morning, he talked Sandecker into phoning Kirsty Fury and asking her for a favor. Would she be kind enough to lend them a boat so that Teedy could do some watercolors of the shoreline from the sea? He and Pitt would accompany her and do some fishing.
Of course. See my dockmaster. He will have a cruiser ready for you. Our boats are moored at Pier 12.
When they got to the pier, the guard had a gleaming 32-foot Chris Craft cruiser waiting for them. But Pitt talked him into letting them use a 40-foot fishing boat. He spotted Rondheim's albatross insignia on it, and he knew that it would be outfitted with a death sounder. Teedy didn't understand. Well, why this dirty old tub? Why not that nice yacht? Because it has a Fleming 610, Pitt explained. Top of the line, extra sensitive frequencies for detecting fish at different depths. It's our only hope of finding the black plane. Pitt and Sandecker carried tackle boxes and fishing rods and Teedy a sketch pad. The boat was named the Grimsay. Before taking the boat on a slow, leisurely tour of Reykjavik harbor, Sandecker stopped at a bait boat and purchased 2 buckets of herring. Teedy spotted the docksman running towards them, frantically waving his hands. He's probably just realized what a mistake he's made giving us this boat, Pitt said. Admiral, let's go. Then they cast off and headed toward the sea. As soon as they rounded a rocky point and lost sight of the harbor, Sandecker eased open the throttles and slowly pushed the Grimsay to 30 knots. Pitt tapped a spot on his map with a pencil. Yeah, it's right about here, 20 miles southeast of Keflavik. Sandecker nodded.
Hour and a half, no more.
Pitt couldn't help smiling as he watched Sandecker at the controls. He was back in his element, and he was enjoying every minute of it. Then Pitt thought of Hunnewell, of Fury, of Mattagik, of O'Reilly, and he wasn't smiling any longer. He still wasn't smiling as he watched the stylus on the depth sounder's graph zigzag across the paper, measuring the sea floor. The bottom showed at 130 feet. He wasn't smiling now because somewhere down there in the depths was an airplane with a dead crew, and he had to find it. Sandecker reminded Pitt to check his diving gear.
We're getting close.
I've already checked it, Admiral. All accounted for. Remind me to buy those State Department people at the consulate a drink when we get back. Dressing up and playing bait fisherman took a bit of doing on such short notice. The diving gear was slipped on board so smoothly and inconspicuously while you were going through the routine of bait buying, I almost missed detecting the transfer from 10 feet away.
I don't like the action, Dirk. Diving alone invites danger, and danger invites death. What do you hope to find down there besides a broken airplane and bloated bodies? How do you know someone hasn't already beaten us to it?
There is an outside chance that the bodies may carry identification that might point to the man behind this screwed-up enigma. This factor alone makes it worth an attempt to find the remains. What's more important is the aircraft itself. All identifying numbers and insignia were hidden under black paint, leaving nothing recognizable at a distance except a silhouette. That plane, Admiral, is the only positive lead we have to Hunnewell's and Matajic's murderer. The one thing black paint can't cover is the serial number of an engine, at least not on the turbine casing under the cowling. If we find the plane, and if I can retrieve the digits, it then becomes a simple matter just to contact the manufacturer, trace the engine to the plane, and from there, to the owner.
Well, as much as I hate the murderous son of a bitch, I still give him credit for brains, Sandecker mused. He'd have already searched for the missing plane, knowing that the wreckage could give him away.
That's true, he would have made a surface search, but this time, for the first time, we have the advantage. Nobody witnessed the fight. The farmer and his son, who found Hunnewell and me on the beach, said they investigated only after they noticed the Ulysses laying in the surf, not before. And the fact that our friendly assassins didn't kill us when they had an ideal opportunity, instead of arriving at the doctor's house much later, proves they weren't ground observers. To sum up, I'm the only survivor who knows where to look. Pitt broke off suddenly, his eyes concentrating on the graph and stylus. Well, I think we got it. Circle to port and cross our wake on course 185, Admiral. Sandecker spun the helm and made a 270-degree swing to the south.
What depth?
145 feet. Judging from the indication, we just passed over her from wingtip to wingtip. Minutes later, the Grimsay was moored over the reading on the depth sounder. The shore was nearly a mile away. A slight breeze sprang up and began to ruffle the surface of the rolling water. It was a signal foretelling the beginning of the rougher weather to come. With the breeze, a state of chilling apprehension raised the hairs on Pitt's neck. For the first time, he began to wonder what he would find beneath the cold Atlantic waters. Minutes later, Pitt had slipped into his gear and dropped over the side, becoming a part of the sea's vastness. Down into a world where there is no sound, no wind, down where air is not known. 5 minutes later, he touched the sea-worn hull of the Grimsay, and Sandecker helped pull him on board.
You find anything of value?
2 bodies and little else. Somebody went to a hell of a lot of work to remove the plane's identification. Every serial number on every piece of equipment was removed before the crash. The only markings were 2 letters scratched on the nose gear's hydraulic cylinder, SC. Pitt gratefully accepted a towel from Teedy. The boxes I sent up, did you retrieve them? Sandecker nodded.
Well, it wasn't easy. They broke surface about 40 feet away. 20 tries later, I haven't cast with a pole in years. I managed to hook and reel them in.
You opened them?
Yes. They're miniature models of buildings, like dollhouses.
Pitt straightened. Dollhouses? What, you mean 3-dimensional architectural exhibits?
Well, call them what you want. Damn fine craftsmanship. The detail on each structure is amazing. They even break away by floors so you can study the interior.
Okay, well, let's take a look.
Come with me. We carried them into the galley.
In the galley, Sandecker lifted the boxes onto the table and pulled off the lids. To say the models were simply masterpieces of diminutive art would have been a gross understatement. The detail was amazing. Every brick, every window pane was precise in scale and placement. Nothing had been overlooked. Paintings, furniture, telephones. As Pitt inspected the models carefully, he realized he knew the second building. You don't often forget a structure built of pink marble. This model is a perfect scaled-down replica of the Dominican Republic Capitol building. He gestured towards the first model. And judging from the design, that one represents the legislative offices of another South or Central American country. Sandecker looked disappointed.
Oh, great. We've come up with a character who collects miniature capitals.
No, it doesn't tell us a hell of a lot, except that the Black Jet was doing double duty.
You mean it was delivering these models when it changed course to shoot down you and Hannibal?
Exactly. One of Rondime's fishing trawlers probably spotted our helicopter approaching Iceland and diverted the jet by radio so it would be waiting for us when we reached the coast.
Why Rondime? I see nothing tangible that ties him in with any of this.
Pitt shrugged. I admit, I'm groping. And at that, I'm not completely sold on implicating Rondime myself. He's like the butler in an old movie mystery. Every piece of circumstantial evidence, every finger of doubt points to him, making him the most obvious suspect. A fine, cold mist had started falling while Pitt was underwater. Sandecker shivered involuntarily.
Rondime's just enough of a prick for me to fervently wish that in some form or manner he's behind Fury's and Hannibal's death so we could zero in on the bastard and nail him to the floor. Okay, well, let's up anchor and get the hell back to Reykjavik. I could use a nice hot toddy.
Pitt suddenly stiffened, held up a hand for silence, and listened intently. It was very faint, but it was there. The sound of an engine running at very high RPMs. You hear it, Admiral?
Yeah, I hear it. About 3 miles, coming fast.
Pitt nodded. It's coming straight towards us. Sounds strange, almost like the whine of an aircraft engine. They must have radar. Teedy looked up at Pitt in alarm. Well, they know we're here, then. Yeah, they know we're here. Unless I'm much mistaken, they're coming to investigate us and are hunting for trouble. I suggest we provide them with a little sport. Quickly, Pitt outlined a plan. Teedy felt her body go numb. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Sandecker led her to the galley steps.
Please get below and take cover behind something that'll stop bullets.
He turned to Pitt.
Use a fire axe and chop the anchor line. Give me the signal when you want full power.
The ship was getting closer, but the mist kept it from sight. Pitt was just lifting the axe into the air when the Grimsay's engines rumbled to life. He swung the axe cleanly through the rope into the wooden railing, sending the anchor forever to the black sandy bottom. The unseen boat was almost upon them now, the roar of its engine dying to a muted throb as the helmsman eased back the throttles in preparation for coming alongside the Grimsay. A shadowy bulk slowly eased into view through the fog, showing its port bow. Pitt could now see that it was a hydroplane. He could make out several dim forms standing on the forward deck. Other men were leaning over the bulwarks, crouched as if ready to jump. The automatic rifles in their hands told Pitt all he needed to know. Coolly and precisely, no more than 8 feet from the gun barrels on the Spectre ship, Pitt made 3 movements so rapidly they almost seemed simultaneous. Swinging the axe head sideways, he brought the flat face down loudly on an iron capstan, the signal to Sandecker. Then in the same swinging motion he hurled the axe through the air and saw the pick part of the head bury itself in the chest of a man who was in the act of jumping down on the Grimsay's deck. They met in midair. A ghastly scream reaching from the man's throat as he and the axe fell against the railing. He hung there for an instant and then dropped into the gray water. Even before the sea closed over the man's head, Pitt had hurled himself on the worn planks of the deck, and the Grimsay leaped ahead, chased by a storm of shells. Sandecker's voice was barely audible over the engines.
Any hits?
No, there's no holes in me. The problem now is to prevent a repeat performance. Teedy cautiously came up from the galley. Pitt explained that their primary advantage was maneuverability. Well, in simple English, a hydroplane can't really turn worth a damn. The ever-thickening fog, even though it was only 1:30 in the afternoon, was also in their favor. Pitt outlined a new defense plan, and the 3 of them scurried about the boat, preparing their arsenal. It had to be the poorest excuse for an arsenal ever concocted, Pitt mused, but it was the best they could do. One of the containers was a gallon glass jar Teedy had scrounged from the galley. The other 3 were battered and rusty gas cans in various sizes that Pitt had found in a locker aft of the engine room. It was time for Sandecker to cut the engines. Pitt led Teedy down the galley steps again, then sat on the forward hatch cover waiting until his hearing picked up the engines of the hydroplane. He didn't have to wait long. Everything had to go perfectly the first time. There could be no second chance. The radar operator on the hydroplane was probably, at this instant, reacting to the fact that the blip on his scope had lost headway and had stopped dead in the water. By the time he notified the commander and a decision was reached, it would be too late for a course change. The hydroplane's superior speed would have put its bow almost on top of the Grimsay. Pitt rechecked the containers lying in a neat row beside him. The hydroplane was close now. Very close. Pitt turned to the wheelhouse. "Now!" Then he lit the wick of the glass jar with his lighter and braced himself for the sudden surge of acceleration he prayed would come. Sandecker pushed the starter button. The 420 horsepower Stirlings coughed once, twice, then burst into RPMs with a roar. He jammed the throttles forward. The Grimsay took off over the water like a racehorse. The Admiral held on grimly, suddenly aware that bullets were striking at the wheelhouse. He could still see nothing, but he knew the crew of the hydroplane were firing blindly through the fog, guided only by the commands of the radar operator. To Pitt, the tension was unbearable. The flame on the wick was getting dangerously close to the tapered neck and the gasoline sloshing behind the glass. 5 seconds, no more, then he would have to heave the jar over the side. He began counting. 5 came and went. 6. 7. He cocked his arm. 8. Then the hydroplane leaped from the mist on an opposite course, passing no more than 10 feet from the Grimsay's railing. Pitt hurled the jar. The next instant stayed etched in Pitt's memory the rest of his days. The frightful image of a tall, yellow-haired man in a leather windbreaker gripping the bridge railing, watching in shocked fascination that deathly thing sailing through the damp air toward him. Then the jar burst on the bulkhead beside him and he vanished in a blast of searing, bright flame. Pitt saw no more. The two boats had raced past each other and the hydroplane was gone. Pitt had no time to reflect. Quickly he lit the wick on one of the gas cans as Sandecker swept the Grimsay on a hard-aport 180-degree swing into the hydroplane's wake. The hydroplane had slowed, and a pulsating yellowish-red glow could easily be seen through the gray mist. The Admiral headed straight for it.
"Hit 'em again, Pitt! Give the bastards a taste of their own medicine!"
Pitt lobbed his dented cans of searing destruction until his makeshift arsenal was used up. And then it hit the Grimsay, a thunderous shock wave that knocked Pitt to the deck and blew out what glass was left in the windows around Sandecker. The hydroplane had erupted in a volcanic roar of fire and flaming debris, instantly becoming a blazing inferno from end to end. Sandecker had a thin slice on one cheek that trickled blood.
"You see any survivors?"
Pitt shook his head. "They've had it." Teedy entered the wheelhouse, her expression one of total bewilderment. "What happened?" Sandecker looked confused.
"Well, it wasn't the fuel tanks. Of that much I'm certain."
Pitt nodded grimly. "I agree. They must have had explosives lying above decks that got in the way of my last homemade firebomb." The hydroplane was going down by the stern, sinking rapidly. The sea crowded over the gunwales and swamped the flames, hissing in a cloud of steam. And the hydroplane was gone. "There's no sense in hanging around, Admiral. I suggest we just head back to Reykjavik as fast as we dare through this fog. The quicker and the farther we hightail it out of this area before the weather clears, the better for all concerned." Sandecker glanced at his watch. It was now 1:45. The entire action had barely lasted 15 minutes. 3 hours later, and 20 miles south of Reykjavik, they rounded the tip of the Keflavik Peninsula and broke out of the fog. Iceland's seemingly eternal sun greeted them in dazzling brilliance. A sly, devilish smile cut a swath across Sandecker's face.
"I can't begin to tell you how sad I feel about returning Rondime's boat in such shabby condition."
"Well, Rondime might well laugh away the damage to the Grimsay, but he won't exactly roll in the aisle laughing when he hears the fate of his hydroplane and crew." Sandecker faced Pitt.
"How can you possibly connect Rondime with the hydroplane?"
"The connection is the boat we're standing on."
"Well, you'll have to do better than that."
Pitt sat down on a bench over a life-preserver locker and lit a cigarette. "Well, the best plans of mice and men. Rondime planned well, but he overlooked the 1,000-to-1 chance that we would swipe his boat. Do you know why the Grimsay was tied to the Fury dock? It was there to follow us. If we had acted suspiciously once we were at sea, there'd have been no way for us to shake them. The cabin cruiser's top speed probably stands near 20 knots. We know the Grimsay's to be closer to 40. Sandecker smiled.
"Well, the expressions on a few faces must have been priceless."
Panic undoubtedly reigned for a while until Rondime could figure out an alternate plan. I give him credit, he's a smart bastard. He no doubt planned to feed us to the fish after we pinpointed the exact position of the black jet. We had to be stopped before we discovered something vital to his game.
And something vital to his game?
Sandecker probed. The models. They represent more than just a hobby. They have a definite purpose. It was 4 o'clock when they tied up to the ferry dock. The ramp was deserted, the dockmaster and the guard obvious by their absence. Pitt and Sandecker weren't fooled. They knew their every move had been studied the second the Grimsay rounded the harbor breakwater. 20 minutes later, they reached the American consulate. The young staff members who played such professional roles as bait fishermen locked the two models away in the consul's vault. Pitt then quickly showered and changed clothes and took a taxi waiting outside the consulate to the airport at Keflavik. There was something about the cab driver's accent that intrigued Pitt. Then it came to him that there was an unmistakable American Midwestern quality to it. The driver took him to the general maintenance hangar, the one that handled transient, non-scheduled aircraft. Inside the hangar, Pitt found a shaggy, long-haired Air Force mechanic who spoke English and turned out to be the very same SC who Pitt was looking for.
"You got your man, Major. I knew we're too good to last."
What's too good to last?
"My moonlighting activities, working as a hydraulic specialist for civilian airlines during my off-duty hours. Well, I knew it was against U.S. Air Force regulations, but the money was just too good to pass up. I guess I can kiss my stripes goodbye?"
Pitt asked him for his name, rank, and serial number.
Sam Cashman, Sergeant, Air Force 19385628. Are you going to bust me, sir?"
"I don't give a rat's ass whether you moonlight or not. All I want are the answers to a few simple questions."
"Ask away, Major."
"Do you usually scratch your initials in the equipment you repair?"
Yeah, it's kind of a trademark, you might say."
"Have you ever repaired the nose gear of a 12-passenger British jet?" Cashman thought for a moment.
Yeah, about a month ago. One of them new executive twin-turbine Lorelei's. That's a hell of a machine."
"Was it painted black?"
"Well, I couldn't see the paint markings. It was dark. It's about 1:30 in the morning when I got the call. No, it wasn't black, though. I'm positive."
"Any distinguishing features or anything unusual about the repair that you can recall?"
Well, the only distinguishing features were the two weirdos who were flying it. These guys are in a terrible hurry. They kept standing around trying to push me. It pissed me off plenty."
"Any idea where they came from or where they were headed?"
"Oh, no way. They were tight-lipped bastards. They'd talk about nothing but the repair."
"Well, the pilot must have signed a maintenance order."
"No, he refused. He said he was behind schedule. He'd catch me next time. But since I knew there was something fishy about these guys, I went ahead. I filled out a maintenance report. And after replacing the seal on the nose gear, I took a flashlight. I checked out the main landing gear, and there it was. It was stuck away under the right strut, pretty as you please. A green tag saying that this here aircraft's landing gear had been examined and okayed by Master Inspector Clarence Devonshire of Lorelei Aircraft Limited. The plane's serial number was typed on that tag."
Pitt watched as Cashman retrieved a file and handed it to him.
"There it is, sir. Lorelei, Mark 8, B1608.
Pitt beamed. "Sergeant, you have truly made my day." Pitt was about to leave when he remembered one more thing. He handed Cashman a screwdriver he'd found on the black Lorelei. "By the way, have you ever seen this before?"
Well, fancy that. This here screwdriver's mine. That's mine. I bought it through the catalog of a tool specialty house in Chicago. This is the only one of its kind on the island. How'd you get it? Did them two weirdos steal it from me?"
Pitt nodded. He shook Cashman's hand. "Goodbye, and thank you. I'm grateful for your help."
"I'm glad to do it, Major. Now, hey, you keep the screwdriver for a souvenir. I already ordered a new one. I won't be needed. You keep it."
Back in the cab, staring through the window at the passing green pastures, Pitt idly wondered if the plane could now be tied directly to Rondheim. His mind was still wandering over the possibility when he had the vague impression that the countryside looked different than before. The fields were empty of cattle and ponies. The sea was not where it should have been. Instead, it lay to the rear of the cab, slowly disappearing over a long, low rise in the road. He leaned over the front seat. "Do you have a date with the farmer's daughter, or are you taking the scenic route to run up the meter?" The driver stopped at the side of the road. Privacy is the word, Major. Merely a slight detour so we can have a little chat. The driver's voice froze into nothingness, and for good reason. Pitt had jammed the tip of the screwdriver half an inch into the cavity of his ear. Just keep your hands on the wheel and get this hack back on the road, or your right ear will get screwed into your left. Drive nice and easy back to Keflavik, only this time to the United States Air Force side of the field, where you can play charades with national intelligence agents. That might prove embarrassing, Major Pitt, when you discover you brought in an NIA agent for questioning. Pitt's pressure on the screwdriver didn't relax. That's very second-rate. I'd expect a better story from a high school freshman caught smoking pot in the boys' room. Admiral Sandecker said you wouldn't be an easy man to talk to. The driver identified himself as Jerome P. Lilly IV, NIA agent, and proceeded to answer Pitt's exhaustive barrage of questions. Finally, Pitt was satisfied the man was who he said he was. Lilly suggested Pitt sit back and get comfortable. He proceeded to detail a chain of strange circumstances during the last 18 months that undoubtedly could be linked to Pitt's mission. From the southernmost tip of Chile to the northern border of Guatemala, secretly, through a complex series of clandestine maneuvers, the great mining companies of South America have slowly merged into one giant syndicate. Outwardly, it's business as usual, but behind the locked and barred doors of their respective administrations, the policies governing their operations come directly from a single unknown organization. The names of the men we've been able to uncover who are high on the totem pole include 12 of the wealthiest men in the Western world, all possessing vast financial powers in mineral exploitation, and each with tentacles so long that they reach out and control over 200 industrial corporations. Once they gain a monopoly, they can force the prices of copper, aluminum, zinc, and several other commercial ores halfway to the moon. The resulting inflation would devastate the economies of at least 30 nations, the United States, of course, being one of the first to go to its knees. Pitt frowned. It doesn't necessarily follow. If that happens, they and their financial empires would be sucked down, too. Lilly smiled and nodded. That's the catch. I mean, these men, F. James Kelly, the U.S., Sir Eric Marks of Great Britain, and others, each worth close to 10 figures. They're all loyal to their respective countries. Any one of them might chisel and cheat on taxes, but none of them would willingly send his government over the brink of economic disaster. Well, then, where's the profit motive? We don't know. And Rondime's connection? None, except his relationship with Kirsty Fury and her offshore mining interests. There was a long silence, which Pitt finally broke. Well, the burning question is, then, where do you fit in? What does the takeover of Latin American mining syndicates have to do with Iceland? The NIA didn't send you up here to play cab driver just to learn the local highway system. So while your brother agents are lurking around behind potted plants, watching Kelly, Marks, and the others, your assignment is to keep an eye on another member of the Money Boys group. Shall I mention the name, or would you like it written on paper and sealed in an envelope by Price Waterhouse? Lilly stared at him for a moment, considering. You're shooting in the dark. Am I? Come on, Lilly, you've reached the same conclusions I have. Kirsty Fury may control Fury Limited, but Oscar Rondime controls Kirsty Fury. Clever deduction, Major Pitt. You're quite correct in everything you've said. Pitt grinned. He gave Lilly the serial number on the black jet and told him he believed the plane could be traced to Rondime. Lilly looked at his watch. Yeah, we better head back to Reykjavik. You're going to a poetry reading party. You gotta be kidding. No, I'm serious. By special invitation from Oscar Rondime himself, though I suspect it was Miss Fury's idea. Pitt rolled his eyes. A poetry reading. God, that ought to be a winner. The entire block in front of the ornate grille doors of Rondime's mansion was lined with limousines, representing every expensive auto manufacturer of every country unloading its cargo of formally dressed passengers. Beyond the entryway, 80 to 90 guests drifted in and out of the main salon and the terrace, conversing in a spectrum of different languages. At the far end of the great salon, Kirsty Fury and Oscar Rondime anchored the receiving line under a massive crest bearing the red albatross. Kirsty was radiantly beautiful, gowned in white silk with gold trim, her blonde hair elegantly wound Grecian style. Rondime, tall and hawk-like, towered beside her, his thin lips cracking in a smile only when politeness required. Pitt joined Dee. He was an experienced party-goer and usually mixed with ease, but there was an odd atmosphere about this function. He couldn't put his finger on it, yet there was something definitely out of place. Then suddenly he had it. He bent down and whispered in Tity's ear, "Do you get the feeling we are persona non grata?" She looked up at Pitt with a sly smile. You're just nervous because you're way out of your league. See those two men over there standing by the piano? You don't recognize them? Should I? You don't read the society pages of the New York Times? Oh, no, Playboy is the only publication I bother with. She threw him a feminine, disgusted with the male of the species expression. They are two of the richest men in the world. Their names? The bald-headed fat man is Hans von Hummel. The distinguished-looking one is F. James Kelly. Look around the room, T. Do you recognize anyone else? T.D. quickly did as she was told, scanning the main salon for a familiar face. The old fellow with the funny-looking glasses sitting on the settee, that's Sir Eric Marks. Well, I still say there's something funny about all this, Pitt said more to himself than to T.D. It wasn't long before the guests were seated in the study for Rontheim's poetry reading. He first read his latest work in his native Icelandic language, then selected verses in English from a contemporary Irish poet. Afterwards, Rontheim announced that he wished to play a game.
As most of you know, my favorite diversion is memorizing verse. I would, at this time, like to put my reputation on the block and invite any of you in the audience to begin a line of verse that comes to your mind. If I cannot finish the stanza that follows or complete the poem to your total satisfaction, I shall personally donate $50,000 to your favorite charity. He waited until the murmur of excited voices tapered to a silence once more. Shall we begin? Who will be the first to challenge my memory? There were many takers, but none succeeded in stumping Rontheim. But it gave Pitt an idea. He raised his hand. Do you wish to try your luck, Major Pitt? I can only offer you 3 words. I accept the challenge. Please state them. God save thee. Elementary, Major. You've done me the kindness of allowing me to quote from my favorite verse. God save thee, ancient mariner, from the fiends that plague thee thus. Why look'st thou so? With my crossbow I shot the albatross. And suddenly Rontheim stopped, looking at Pitt curiously. There is little need to continue. It's obvious to all present that you have asked me to quote the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. For Pitt, the light suddenly became brighter at the end of the tunnel. He knew something that he hadn't known before. It wasn't over yet, but things were looking up. He was glad now that he'd played the proverbial long shot. The gamble had paid off. The nightmare of Honeywell's death would never trouble his sleep again. A satisfied smile touched his lips. Thank you, Mr. Rontheim. Your magnificent memory serves you well. There was something about Pitt's tone that made Rontheim uneasy. The pleasure is mine, Major. He didn't like the smile on Pitt's lips. He didn't like it at all. After the reading, the men were directed to the trophy room for cigars and 100-year-old Rouge brandy. Apart from himself and Oscar Rontheim, Pitt counted 32 men gathered around the flames crackling in the immense fireplace. The reaction to Pitt's presence was interesting. No one noticed him. For a fleeting moment, he pictured himself a ghost with no substance that had just walked through the wall and was waiting for a seance to begin so that he could put in a spiritual appearance. He could have imagined all sorts of strange scenes, but there was no imagining the blunt, circular gun barrel that was pressing into his spine. He didn't bother to see whose hand held the gun. It would have made little difference. Rontheim answered any doubt. Kirsty! Rontheim stared behind Pitt. You are early. I didn't expect you for another 20 minutes. He came over and took the gun from Kirsty's hand as though he was a concerned parent. Guns and beauty do not go together. You must allow a man to guard the Major. Oh, I rather enjoyed it. It's been so long since I've held one. I see no reason to delay any further, Eric Marks called out. Our timing is complex. We must proceed at once. Rontheim pushed the button on a telephone. He didn't lift the receiver or talk into it. Several hard-looking, expressionless men in black coveralls suddenly materialized at the opposite end of the room, AR-17 automatic rifles braced in the firing position. Slowly, very slowly, almost unnoticed, Kelly,
Rondheim, von Hummel, Marx, and 8 other men had grouped themselves on one side of the fireplace, leaving Pitt and the remaining guests standing opposite the flames in utter bewilderment. Pitt noted with a touch of uneasiness that all the guns were aimed at his group. F. James Kelly stepped forward.
"Have any of you heard of Hermit Limited?"
No one said a word.
Well, Hermit Limited is international in scope, but you won't find it on any stock exchange because it is vastly different in administration from any business you're familiar with. I don't have time to go into all the details of its operations, so just let me say that Hermit's main goal is to achieve control and take possession of South and Central America.
He searched the faces on the other side of the fireplace. They were all blank with disbelief.
I am F. James Kelly. In my lifetime, I have amassed over $2 billion in assets. Now, being wealthy carries tremendous responsibilities. As many as 200,000 people depend on me for their living. If I was to fail financially tomorrow, it would cause a recession that would be felt from one end of the United States to the other, not to mention the many countries around the world that depend upon my subsidiary companies for a high percentage of their local economies. Yet, as these gentlemen around me can testify, riches do not guarantee immortality. Very few of the rich are remembered in the history books. 2 years ago, I began thinking about what I would leave after I was gone. A financial empire fought over by parasitic business associates and relatives who had only counted the days till my funeral so they could grab the spoils. Believe me, gentlemen, it was a pretty dismal thought. So I considered methods to distribute my assets in ways that would benefit mankind. But how? What would do the most good for the peoples of the world, regardless of white, yellow, red, black or brown skins, regardless of nationalities? Something that would have a lasting impact on millions of people for hundreds of years.
Kelly took a second to collect his thoughts and went on.
It has never been my intention to play God. Whatever path I chose had to come from a means far more calculating, far less emotional than the human mind. Systems analysis provided the only efficient solution to the problem I presented myself. Programming a computer to select a country or geographic location that is ripe for a controlled and developed utopian atmosphere, and the method to achieve that goal is not as far-fetched as you might think. After I satisfied myself that the program was sound and had every chance to succeed, I approached Marx, von Hummel, and the other gentlemen you see here who possessed the financial means to make it a reality. And they thought as I did. Money is to be used for the common good of all. We then met and formed Hermit Limited. Each of us owns equal shares of stock and has an equal voice on the board of directors. We intend to write a new chapter in the history of mankind, to accomplish the impossible by adhering to strict business principles.
I can't say as I recall murder being taught as a required course in business administration school, Pitt called out.
An unfortunate but necessary part of the plan, returned Kelly. Methodical assassination is perhaps a more fitting term.
A Frenchman standing next to Pitt looked dazed.
I do not understand. How can my associates here and I take over an entire continent? Basically, it's elementary. Purely a problem of economics. We start with an impoverished country, gain control of its monetary resources, discreetly eliminate its key leaders, and buy it out. Take, for example, Bolivia, a country whose people are close to starvation. In many cases, the income per family barely exceeds $20 a year. Its whole economy is based on the Perosa copper mines. Gain control of the mines, and you gain control of the country.
Pitt poured a glass to the brim with brandy. I should think Bolivia's army will have something to say about a foreign-inspired takeover.
Quite right, Major Pitt. But armies have to be paid. Each has its price, particularly its generals. And if they refuse to be bought, it is then a simple matter of elimination. After Hermit Limited assumes the administration of the government, the army shall be gradually disbanded. And why not? It's only a drain on the economy. You could compare an army to a company that is losing money. The obvious solution is to close the doors and write it off as a tax loss.
An old man named Sam spoke up.
Have you forgotten the people, James? Do you truly expect them to stand idly while you turn that country upside down? Like any growing concern, we have an advertising and marketing department. As with the new product about to be introduced on the market, we have a detailed promotional campaign, all worked out. People only know what they see and hear in the media to which they have access. One of the first steps was to purchase, under a local citizen's name, of course, whatever newspapers, radio, and television stations that were available.
Pitt stared at Kelly icily. I assume you don't envision a free press in your Shangri-La.
A free press is purely a form of permissiveness. Look what it has done to the United States. Print anything, so long as it's filthy, scandalous, and sensational, anything to sell more papers in order to obtain more paid advertising.
Well, granted, the American press isn't perfect, Pitt countered, but at least they make an effort to get at the truth and expose autocrats like yourself. Sam spoke again.
After you buy out one country, James, how do you intend to take over the rest? Well, that's simple. When Bolivia is established as the utopian prototype, the envy of all the peoples on the continent, then we shall annex her neighboring countries one by one. The poor and the hungry will be eager to snatch at any straw that guarantees an immensely higher standard of living.
Pitt downed his brandy. He walked over to the table and poured himself another glass of the Rouge, a last drink for the road, because he knew Kelly never meant for him to leave the house through the front door. Kelly came and stood over Pitt, staring with a strangely expressionless gaze that was more disturbing than any display of animosity could ever have been.
This game has gone far enough, Major.
Too bad. I was just getting warmed up, just getting to the good part.
It isn't necessary.
Well, neither was killing Dr. Hunnewell. That was a terrible, terrible mistake, a sad miscalculation. Doubly so, since the good doctor was a key member of Hermit Limited. For perhaps 10 shocked, incredulous seconds, Pitt let his words soak in. Rondheim and the other members of Hermit Limited were as uncomprehending as if each had just come home and found his wife in bed with another man. Your computers must have blown a fuse, Pitt continued. Admiral Sandecker and I were on to Dr. Hunnewell right from the start. Pitt lied, knowing there was no way Kelly or Rondheim could prove otherwise. Actually, our first tip-off came when Dr. Len Matajic was rescued. No, that cannot be. Pitt gave silent thanks to Sandecker for his wild plan to resurrect the ghosts of Matajic and O'Reilly. As I started to say, when Dr. Matajic was rescued, he described the Lax and its crew in vivid detail. He wasn't fooled for a minute by the alterations to the superstructure.
And then?
Kelly prodded. Well, the rest was simple deduction. Thanks to Matajic's description, it didn't take any great effort to trace the ship's whereabouts from the time it disappeared to when it moored on the Iceberg, where Matajic had his research station. Because of Dr. Matajic's powers of observation, the crew's suntan hardly spelled a fishing trip in North Atlantic waters. Admiral Sandecker was able to figure the Lax's previous course along the South American coast. He then began to suspect Dr. Hunnewell.
Go on.
Well, obviously the Lax had been utilizing the undersea probe to find new mineral deposits. And just as obviously, with Feary and his engineers dead, Dr. Hunnewell, the co-inventor of the probe, was the only one around who knew how to operate it.
You are exceedingly well informed, but that hardly constitutes proof.
Oh, proof, is it? Okay. Will you accept the words of a dying man, straight from the horse's mouth? The man in question is Dr. Hunnewell himself.
I don't believe it.
His last words before he died in my arms were, God save thee. Rondheim looked ready to explode.
What are you talking about? What are you trying to do?
Hunnewell knew who his murderer was, the man who gave the order for his death. He tried to quote from the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. It was all there, wasn't it? You quoted it yourself. Why look'st thou so? With my crossbow, I shot the albatross. Your trademark, Oscar. The red albatross. That's what Hunnewell meant. Now, I can't match your memory for quoting the verse verbatim, but if my memory serves me correctly, the ancient mariner and his ship of ghosts were met by a hermit near the end. Another tie-in. Yes, it was all in the verse. Hunnewell pointed the finger of guilt with his dying breath, and you, Oscar, stood up and unwittingly pleaded guilty. Kelly idly stared at the smoke from his cigar.
You sent your arrow in the right direction, Major Pitt, but you aimed at the wrong man. I gave the order for Dr. Hunnewell's death.
For what purpose?
Dr. Hunnewell was beginning to have second thoughts about Hermit Limited's methods of operation. Quite old-fashioned thoughts, really. Thou shalt not kill and all that. He threatened to expose our entire organization unless we closed down our assassination department, a condition that was impossible to accept if we were to have any chances for ultimate success. Therefore, Dr. Hunnewell had to be discharged from the firm.
And I had to be swept under the carpet because I was a witness. Kelly simply nodded. But the undersea probe, with Hunnewell and Fury, the geese who laid the golden eggs, dead, who is left with the knowledge to build a second-generation model?
No one. But then, no one is required. You see, our computers have now been programmed with the necessary information. With proper analysis of the data, we should have a working model of the probe within 90 days.
For a brief moment, Pitt stood silent, caught unprepared by the unexpected disclosure. Then he quickly shook off his surprise. Then Hunnewell no longer served a useful purpose. Your data-processing brains discovered the secret of producing Celtinium-279.
I compliment you, Major Pitt. You possess a penetrating discernment.
Kelly glanced impatiently at his watch and nodded to Rondheim. Then he turned.
I'm sorry, but I'm afraid the time has come, gentlemen. The party is over. What do you intend on doing with us, James?
Sam's eyes burned into Kelly's until the billionaire turned and avoided the stare.
It's obvious you told us your secrets as a courtesy to our curiosity. It's also obvious you can never let us walk from this house with those secrets in our heads. None of us, even me, your own brother.
Pitt couldn't believe what he had heard.
It's true. None of you can be permitted to tell what you heard here tonight. But why? Why expose us to your clandestine operation and thereby seal our death warrants?
Kelly tiredly rubbed his eyes.
The moment of truth. The denouement. It is now 11 o'clock. In exactly 42 hours and 10 minutes, Hermit Limited will open its doors for business. 24 hours later, we will be running the affairs of our first client, or country, if you prefer. In order to make this historical event as inauspicious as possible, we need a diversion. A disaster that will attract headlines and cause anxious concern among the leaders of the world governments, while our plan is carried off practically unnoticed. And we are your diversion. That's right, Sam. The innocent victims of a disaster spawned by computers to make headlines. God, it's barbaric. Yes, but necessary. In your own ways, to your own countries, you are important men. You represent the industry, government, and science of 5 different nations. Your combined loss will be considered a worldwide tragedy.
This must be some sort of insane joke, a Russian man shouted. You cannot simply shoot 2,000 men and their wives down like animals.
Your wives will be returned to your lodgings safe and unharmed. We have no intention of shooting anyone. We intend to rely on Mother Nature to do the job, with a little help, of course. After all, shootings can be traced. Accidents merely regretted.
Rondheim motioned the black coveralled men with the guns to move in closer.
If you please, gentlemen, roll up one of your sleeves.
As if on cue, Kirsty left the room and quickly returned, carrying a small tray set with bottles and hypodermic syringes. She set the tray down and began filling the syringes.
I'll be damned if you'll stick a needle in my arm, one of the men in Pitt's group exploded. You shoot me now and get it over.
His eyes went glassy as a guard's rifle butt caught him behind the ear, and he slumped to the floor. Rondheim grimly looked on.
Let us have no further argument.
He turned to Pitt. "Come into the next room, Major. In your instance, I shall deal with you on a personal basis." He waved the gun he had taken from Kirsty toward a doorway. Rondheim, followed by 2 of his guards, escorted Pitt along a wide hall, down a circular flight of stairs, into another hall, and then shoved him roughly through a doorway. Pitt stumbled awkwardly and fell to the floor. "Get up!" Rondheim commanded. As soon as he did, Rondheim was on top of him with a quick combination of sledgehammer blows to the head that never seemed to end, followed by a front kick to the ribs. And Pitt heard, rather than felt, one of his ribs snap. He sank to his knees and slowly slumped forward onto his face, so badly injured that blood and vomit mingled freely in his mouth and flowed forth in an ever-widening pool. Rondheim turned to the guards. "Throw the bastard in with the others. If he is fortunate and opens his eyes once more, he can have the satisfaction of knowing he died among friends."
"Oh, God, thank you for bringing him back."
The voice, it sounded miles away.
Dirk, it's Teety."
Pitt focused his eyes with difficulty. Teety was gazing down at him, her long fawn-colored hair framing a pale and anxious face. Then another voice spoke.
"Did you get the license number of the truck, Major, or was it a bulldozer that mashed your already ugly profile?"
Pitt turned his head and looked into the smiling face of Jerome P. Lilly. He slowly pulled himself to a sitting position. The sight that met his eyes looked like something out of a nightmare. A broken helicopter was a scant 10 yards away. The jagged remains of the hulk lay half sunk in mud at the bottom of a deep ravine whose walls rose 100 feet toward the Iceland sky. He noted that the shattered craft was large, probably one of the Titan class, capable of carrying 30 passengers. Pitt's first frightful impression, the one that ruled his confused mind, was that no one from the crash could have lived, but there they were, Teety, Lily, and scattered above the steep slope of the ravine in unnatural, pain-contorted positions, the same group of men who had stood beside Pitt in Rondheim's trophy room, the same group who had opposed F. James Kelly and Hermit Limited. They all appeared to be alive, but most were badly injured. The grotesque angles of their arms and legs revealed a terrible array of smashed and broken bones.
"I'm sorry to ask the inescapable question, but, what in the hell happened?" "Not what you think," Lily replied. "We didn't crash. The wreck has been here for days, maybe even weeks."
Pitt stared incredulously at Lily.
"You better fill me in. What happened to these people? How did you come to be here?" "That is not too much to my story. Rondheim's men caught me snooping around the Albatross docks, and before I had a chance to uncover anything, they hustled me off to Rondheim's house and threw me in with these other gentlemen. Well, no one is in immediate danger of dying from their injuries. Rondheim saw to that. Our primary peril is exposure. The temperature is under 40 degrees now. In another few hours it'll be freezing, and after that, the cold and the shock will take the first of us, and by morning there will be nothing in this goddamn ravine but frozen bodies."
Rondheim saw to that? I'm afraid
You don't get it? You're slow on the trigger, Major Pitt. It's obvious the carnage you see here was never caused by accident. Immediately after our sadistic friend Rondheim beat you to a pulp, we were each given a heavy dose of Nembutal, and then, very coldly and methodically, he and his men took us one at a time and fractured whatever bones they thought were necessary to make it appear as though we were all injured in the crash of the helicopter. Oh my God, it has to be some kind of insane nightmare. Nothing insane about the reason. There is a method to Kelly and Rondheim's madness. I was the last one they put under the drug. I overheard Kelly explaining to Sir Eric Marks about how this whole unreal tragedy was conceived by Hermit Limited's computers. Kelly and his rich friends need all the time they can buy to become entrenched in whatever country it is they intend to take over. The longer our State Department is diverted by the loss of high-ranking diplomats, the harder it will be when they get around to putting the screws on Hermit Limited's operations.
Now Pitt understood.
This way, Kelly can have the advantage of an extended search. And when hope begins to grow dim, he can arrange for an Icelander to stumble accidentally on the crash site and the bodies. And Kelly can reap the advantage of an extra 2 weeks while the world mourns the government leaders and are concentrating on speeches at the funeral processions.
Lily nodded his head.
Every alternative was neatly considered.
We were all supposedly on a flight to Rondime's northern estate for a day of salmon fishing. His group, the Hermit Limited Bunch, were going to come on the next flight. At least, that's the story that will be handed out. What's to stop someone from accidentally discovering us at any moment? T.D. asked. Pitt looked all around him. Well, I'd guess we can't be seen unless that someone is standing practically on top of us. And add that to the fact that we're probably in the most uninhabited area of Iceland, and the odds of being found begin to stretch to infinity. Now you can clearly see the picture, Lily said. The helicopter had to be placed in the narrow confines of the ravine and then destroyed because it could not have been purposely crashed with any degree of accuracy. A perfectly undetectable location. A search plane directly overhead could have no more than a second to spot the debris. There's a 1,000,000 to 1 chance at best. The next step was to scatter our bodies around the area. And then, after 2 or 3 weeks of decomposition, the most a competent coroner could determine is that some of us died from injuries sustained from the phony crash, and the rest from exposure and shock. Am I the only one who can walk? Pitt asked. A few can, but with broken arms, they'll never make it to the top of the ravine. Then I guess I'm elected. Lily smiled faintly. You're elected. If it's any consolation, you'll have the satisfaction of knowing that Rondime is up against a tougher man than his computers projected. The encouragement in Lily's eyes became the extra impetus Pitt needed. The climb to the top of the ravine became a purgatory, punctuated by the agony of his injuries. All emotion had drained away. Pitt's movements became mechanical. Dig and pull. Dig and pull. The only fear he felt was the honest, cold fear of failing over 20 people, whose lives depended on his reaching that line between earth and sky that seemed so far above him. When he finally reached the top, Pitt blundered along in a void all of his own for the next 7 hours. Then, in the middle of climbing a small 8-foot embankment, his body turned off the switch to consciousness and collapsed like a deflated balloon just inches from the top of the ridge. But he had fallen within spitting distance of a small dirt road and was found by an old man aged somewhere beyond 70 years. With surprising strength, the old man lifted Pitt up and carried him to his jeep. Pitt regained complete consciousness at the man's comfortable little house. He tried to administer to Pitt's wounds, but Pitt's only concern was to get help for the others. The man had a radio transmitter instead of a telephone. He contacted the authorities in Reykjavik, then Pitt requested and received a call from the American embassy. They in turn put him through to Sandecker. Every minute we waste with explanations, someone may die. For God's sake, Admiral, just contact the Air Force, get their paramedics loaded on helicopters and supplies to aid victims of an air disaster. Then, while there's time, I can fill you in on the details.
We have a problem here, Dirk. Every helicopter on the island is grounded. The paramedics will have to be airdropped from a transport.
Admiral, do you understand? It is imperative that helicopters be used. The survivors must be airlifted out. And most important, Admiral, I must lead the search. Repeat, I must lead the search. The crash site is invisible from the air. Your rescue party could search for days and never find it.
Pitt could sense the gloom at the other end.
Negative to your request. There are 7 copters on the island. 3 belong to the Air Force, 4 to the Icelandic Search and Rescue Department. All are grounded due to maintenance problems. The possibility seems remote, but our people and the local government authorities smell sabotage.
Oh, Christ.
Do you have enough flat ground for a light plane to land and pick you up? If affirmative, you could direct a rescue drop from the air.
A small plane might make it. There's a level meadow here, the length of a football field.
Pitt became aware of the old man's hand on his shoulder.
There is a storm coming from the north. It will snow within the hour. This will be a bad one.
Pitt held his cut and swollen face in his hands. God save all of them now. It's hopeless. Hopeless. There are many wondrous sights to behold in this world, but to Pitt nothing could ever look half as incredibly beautiful as the old Ford tri-motor, the famed Tin Goose. Pitt thanked the old man who led him to the right side of the fuselage. The door flew open and willing arms reached down and pulled him into the cabin.
Welcome back to the Roaring Twenties, Major. This is a hell of an idea, using this old flying fossil for a rescue mission.
He held out his hand.
I'm Captain Ben Hull.
10 men dressed in Arctic weather gear were on board. They were men who were trained in scuba diving, parachute jumping, survival, and nearly every phase of emergency medicine except surgery.
A wave of confidence surged through Pitt just from observing them. As soon as he was safely strapped in, he turned and found himself staring into the grinning face of Sergeant Sam Cashman.
Well, howdy, Major. I'm the only one on the whole island who's checked out on this old bus. Ain't she a winner? She'll take off and land on a dollar bill and give you change.
Okay, Sergeant, let's swing this bird into the wind and get her up. The sky was darkening by the moment with the mist of falling snow. Even as Cashman made his landing approach, the first flakes began dotting the windshield. Pitt's race had been won, but only by the barest of margins. Cashman made a smooth landing considering the rugged terrain and the difficult wind conditions. Teety couldn't believe her eyes.
Oh, good Lord, you've come back. I thought I heard an airplane. Oh, God, this is wonderful. You've come back.
Pitt smiled faintly, then nodded at Lily, who was lying on the ground with his eyes closed. How is he?
I don't know. He slipped into unconsciousness about half an hour ago.
Pitt knelt down and listened to Lily's breathing. It was slow and steady. He'll make it. The big question is whether he'll ever walk again. Teety pressed her face against Pitt's shoulder and sobbed. Captain Hull approached.
Take the girl first,
Pitt instructed. Her ankles are broken. Hull nodded down at Lily.
How bad is this one?
Fractured shoulders and pelvis. The paramedics carefully eased Lily's inert form into the stretcher and attached the ropes for the ascent to the top of the ravine. Hull tenderly picked Teety up in his massive arms and carried her to a waiting basket. He climbed along beside her all the way to the top of the slope and saw her comfortably bedded down inside the warm tent before he returned to direct the rescue operation. Sandecker closed the file and leaned forward as if he were about to spring.
If you're asking my permission, the answer is an unequivocal no.
I had sincerely hoped we would have no disagreement, Admiral. However, since that is not to be, I must inform you that my presence here is purely an act of courtesy. I already possess the orders for Major Pitt's reassignment.
The words came from a man who sat facing Sandecker. He was short and seemed almost as broad as the chair.
By whose authority?
Well, they were signed by the Secretary of Defense.
Sandecker shook his head.
You're asking too much. Too much.
Well, I don't enjoy this sort of thing, but time is a commodity we can't afford. The whole scheme spawned by Hermit Limited is totally impractical. Who knows? Maybe F. James Kelly has the answer for the future. But at the moment, he is the leader of a gang of maniacs who've murdered nearly 30 people. And exactly 10 hours from now, he plans to assassinate 2 heads of state. Our course is determined by one elementary fact. He must be stopped. And Major Pitt is the only one who is physically capable of recognizing Kelly's hired killers.
Pitt may not be in any condition to leave the hospital.
Well, I'm afraid your fears, or should I say hopes, are groundless. He's had 14 hours of rest, intensive care, and massive vitamin injections, plus the muscle therapy known by the top doctors in Iceland. He has been stitched, massaged, and taped. Fortunately, the only major damage was to his ribs, and at that, the fractures were minor. All in all, he's a sorry mess, but I can't be particular. I'd take him if they were lowering him into a coffin.
Sandecker turned as one of the embassy secretaries poked her head around a door. Major Pitt is here, sir. Sandecker glared at the fat man.
You bastard, you knew all along he would do it.
Pitt came in through the door and shut it behind him. The fat man moved quickly around the desk and offered Pitt his hand.
Kipman, Dean Kipman.
Dean Kipman. You're the chief of the National Intelligence Agency. There's nothing like playing with the big leaguers.
We deeply appreciate your help. Do you feel up to a little air travel?
Well, after Iceland, a little South American sun couldn't hurt.
Well, you'll enjoy the sun, all right, particularly the Southern California variety.
Southern California?
By 4 o'clock this afternoon, you'll be at Disneyland.
At Disneyland? Just what have you got in mind?
Well, until we were able to question you and the other survivors, we only had a sketchy idea at best as the purpose behind Hermit Limited. We knew it existed, and we were fortunate to ferret out a small percentage of their business dealings, but their ultimate goal, the brains, the money behind the entire operation, remained a mystery.
Pitt broke in guardedly. But you had a lead. You suspected Dr. Hunnewell.
Yes, the NIA was trailing Dr. Hunnewell. No concrete evidence, of course. That's why we set him up, in the hope that he would lead us to the men at the top of the organization.
Oh, God, it was a setup. The whole goddamn scene on that iceberg was a setup.
Yes. Honeywell came to our attention when he so thoughtfully provided all the right solutions for Fury Limited's undersea probe, but offered absolutely nothing toward the efforts under development in his own country.
Then entombing the lax was a neat little piece of deception. That was your drawing card. Honeywell was bound to come forward as an investigator when the Admiral here asked him out of what seemed sheer coincidence. Honeywell probably couldn't have believed his luck. He immediately volunteered not to see what happened to his old friend Christian Fury. He'd already guessed that. Or to inspect the strange phenomenon of a ship locked in the sea, but rather to discover what had become of his precious undersea probe.
Again, yes, Major.
Kipman handed Pitt several glossy photographs.
Here are pictures taken from the submarine that kept a watch on the lax for almost 3 weeks. They show no unusual feature about the crew.
Pitt looked up at Sandecker. So the truth comes out at last. The lax was found by the search fleet and then tailed and burned. Sandecker shrugged.
Mr. Kipman took the trouble to notify me of that interesting little fact only last night.
Reproach us if you will, but it was vital that you were both kept on the sidelines as much as possible. If Kelly or Rondheim, or particularly Honeywell, had smelled your connection with us, our whole operation would have bombed.
He stared at Pitt.
Major, you were simply to act as pilot and escort for Honeywell while he inspected the lax. You were then to fly him to Reykjavik, where we would have again taken over our observation of his movements.
Well, it didn't quite work out that way, did it?
No, we underestimated the other side.
Pitt inhaled a cigarette. You haven't explained how the lax came to be in the iceberg, nor have you shed any light on what happened to the pirate crew or given a hint as to how Fury and his crew and scientists could disappear for over a year and then suddenly have their charred bodies turn up on the ship again.
The answer to both questions is simple. Fury's crew never left the ship.
Sandecker's eyes were rock hard.
Matajik saw men who were made up to look like other nationalities. The crew should have been masters at disguise by the time he stumbled onto them. Remember, they'd visited a number of ports. It's only guesswork, of course. We'll never know for certain, but it's fairly safe to say the crew caught O'Reilly watching them and slipped him their phony pose before Matajik came on board for supper.
Pitt nodded. And then what?
Well, you can guess the rest if you don't already know it. Somehow, it's not difficult to imagine. The Celtinium-279 ignited and transformed the lax into a floating incinerator. Our submarine could only stand by and watch helplessly. It happened so quickly there were no survivors. Fortunately, the Navy had put a fast-thinking skipper in command of the sub. A storm was approaching, and he knew it was only a question of time before the red-hot plates on the lax's hull cooled and contracted, bursting their seams and letting the seawater flood in and sink her, a finale further speeded by the force storm building on the horizon.
So he turned a $20 million submarine into a tugboat and nudged the burning hulk against a convenient iceberg until it melted its way inside. Pitt sat there looking at Kipman.
Your theory is quite correct, Major.
The next question that interests me directly is why did you send Honeywell and me chasing all over the North Atlantic, hunting down a particular iceberg after you erased all of its distinguishable markings? Why did you set Honeywell up to find the lax and then deliberately try to hide it? Impassively, Kipman stared at Pitt.
Thanks to you, Major, my men were forced to work their asses off in freezing temperatures, chipping the Coast Guard's red dye marker from the iceberg simply because you showed up 2 days ahead of schedule.
You were going over the lax with a fine-tooth comb and hadn't finished when Honeywell and I appeared on the scene. Isn't that it?
Precisely. Nobody expected you to fly a helicopter through the aftermath of the season's worst storm.
Then your agents were concealed on the berg the entire time Honeywell and I explored the lax. Kipman shrugged.
You didn't give us a chance to pull them off. Now then, from what you and the others in the hospital reported, Hermit Limited's first step will be to assassinate the leader of a Latin American country that they plan to take over. Am I correct?
That's what the man said, beginning with Bolivia.
Well, you shouldn't believe all you hear, Major. Kelly only used Bolivia as an example. He and his group aren't strong enough for a country that size. Remember the models you dredged from the sea? One is the exact replica of the Capitol building of the Dominican Republic. The other is the government legislative chambers in French Guiana. It's the honored opinion of the NIA that Kelly and his little troop will try for a double header.
Sandecker looked at Kipman inquiringly.
Both countries at once? You can't be serious.
Yes, we're serious. Strategically, it's a beautiful situation. It would only be a matter of time before Hermit Limited could then move next door to Haiti and then strangle their economy. Then, using Haiti as a base, they could slowly spread into the Central Latin countries and absorb them, one by one.
Pitt shook his head slowly. And I thought Kelly was insane. The bastard might just do it. He just might pull this fantastic scheme off. Pitt and Kipman flew to Los Angeles in an Air Force bomber. When they landed, they were greeted by Kipman's NIA associates who filled him in on Hermit Limited's latest moves. Kipman, in turn, filled Pitt in as they rode in the limousine.
Well, it seems we're about to crash a family reunion, Major. They're all here. Kelly, Marks, Rontime, the whole lot. We had them traced as soon as they left Iceland. The serial number you found on that black jet came home a winner. Hermit Limited purchased 6 of the same model with consecutive numbers from the factory. We have every one of the remaining 5 planes under surveillance at this moment.
I'm impressed. That was fast work. Kipman dropped a smile.
Not all that tough. It might have been if the planes had been scattered around the globe, but as it is, they're all sitting neatly side by side exactly 8 miles from here at the Orange County Airport.
Then Kelly's headquarters must be nearby.
In the hills behind Laguna Beach, a 50-acre complex. Incidentally, Hermit Limited has over 300 employees on the payroll who think they're doing classified political analysis for their own government.
Well, where do we go from here?
Disneyland. To stop a double murder.
Kipman produced 2 photographs and shoved them in front of Pitt.
Here are the men we're trying to save.
Pitt tapped the face in one of the photos. This is Pablo Castile, President of the Dominican Republic. Kipman nodded.
A brilliant economist and one of the leading members of the Latin American right. Our State Department would hate like hell to see Kelly screw things up just when there's hope of the Dominican Republic becoming economically stable.
Pitt held up the other photo. I can't place him.
Juan de Croix, President of French Guiana.
Well, how is it both of these men are at the same place at the same time?
The leaders of the Western Hemisphere have just finished a conference in San Francisco for the Alliance of Economic and Agricultural Progress. De Croix, Castile, and several other Latin leaders are doing a little sightseeing on the way home.
Why didn't you stop them from entering the park?
I tried, but by the time our internal security forces could act, it was too late. De Croix and Castile have already been in the park for 2 hours and both refused to leave. We can only keep our fingers crossed that Rondime's killers stick to their time schedules.
At Disneyland, the chief of park security, Dan Lazard, outfitted Pitt in a big, bad wolf costume. Kipman fought back a chuckle.
You've got to admit, your own mother wouldn't recognize you in that rig.
Yeah, I suppose it is in keeping with my character. So, what happens now?
Well, between my men, the park security staff, and agents from the FBI, there must be close to 40 people concentrating every effort on stopping the assassination. Some are dressed in costumes like you, and some are walking hand in hand like lovers on a holiday. Some are playing the part of families enjoying the rides. Others have taken over as attendants. We even have men stationed on roofs and in the dummy second-story offices with telescopes and binoculars. The killers will be found and stopped before they do their dirty work. The odds we've stacked against Kelly meeting his goal and deadline are staggering.
Well, tell that to Oscar Rontime. That's the flaw that knocks the hell out of your good intentions. You don't know your adversary. Kipman removed a folder from his briefcase and handed it to Pitt.
Granted, I haven't met him face to face, but he is no stranger to me.
Kipman read aloud from the folder.
Oscar Rontime, alias Max Roland, alias Hugo von Clausen, alias Chatford Marazan, real name Carzo Butera, born in Brooklyn, New York, July 15th, 1940. I could go on for hours about his arrests, his convictions.
I'd be more interested in seeing what you have on Kirsty Fury. Kipman looked as if he'd been shot.
I was hoping you wouldn't get around to her.
He sighed with uneasiness and handed Pitt another file. Pitt reached out and took it. For 10 minutes he examined the contents, leafing very slowly, almost reluctantly, from documents to photos, from reports to letters. Then finally, like a man in a dream, he closed the folder and gave it back to Kipman. I can't believe it. It's ridiculous. I won't believe it.
I'm afraid what you read is true. All of it.
Never in 1,000 years would I have...
Yeah, it threw us out of gear, too. Our first hint came when we could find no trace of her in New Guinea.
I know. I'd already pegged her for a phony on that score. When we had dinner together in Reykjavik, I described a recipe that called for shark meat wrapped in a seaweed known as echidna, and Miss Fury accepted it. An echidna is actually an egg-laying spiny anteater, a mammal very common to the landscape of New Guinea. That's rather strange behavior from a missionary who spent years in the jungles of New Guinea, don't you think? Kipman stared at Pitt with an admiring look.
And what put you onto her in the first place?
Her tan. It was shallow, not burned deep like one acquired after years and months spent in a tropic jungle.
You, Major, are very observant.
The door opened. Lazard stood there, his face ashen. De Croix and Castile have suddenly changed their planned excursion. They've shaken their escort. They've disappeared somewhere in the park. God only knows what can happen before we find them. Kipman exploded.
Christ, how could it happen? How could you lose them with half the federal agents in the state guarding their party?
Pitt stood up. Quickly, do you have their tour and scheduled stops? Yeah, right here. Each amusement and exhibit and their time schedules. Pitt rapidly glanced at the schedule and turned to Kipman. You better send me into the game, Coach. Kipman nodded.
So where do we find De Croix and Castile?
Pitt smiled. Well, the most obvious place where any two men who passed their childhood near the Spanish Main would head. Oh, God, you've hit it, Lazard said. The last stop on the schedule, Pirates of the Caribbean. The Pirates of the Caribbean is perhaps the most popular attraction in the world-famous park. The quarter-of-a-mile boat ride carries awed passengers through a maze of tunnels and past rooms decorated as roving pirate ships and pillaged seaside towns, manned by almost 100 lifelike figures who sing, dance, and loot. The attendant at the attraction recognized the photographs of Castile and De Croix. Yeah, they're in a boat right now, but they weren't alone. There were 2 other men with them. Lazard instructed the young attendant to stop all the boats and call extension 309. We'll tell whoever answers that Lazard has relocated the missing party in the Pirates of the Caribbean. Tell them it's a red situation. The hunters are in there, too. He turned back to Kipman and Pitt. The 3 of us can work along the catwalks and the backdrops till we reach them and only hope we're not too late. They should be about halfway through, probably somewhere between the burning village and the cannon battle, the attendant advised. This way! Lazard disappeared through a doorway at the end of the landing marked Employees Only. As they moved into the blackness that cloaked the mechanical workings of the pirates, the sound of voices from the passengers of the stalled boats could be heard murmuring throughout the cavernous amusement ride. Lazard motioned for Pitt and Kipman to stay where they were as he moved cat-like along a narrow corridor and leaned over the railing of a workman's gallery, running over the canal that supported the boats. Then he waved them forward. Well, we got lucky for a change. Take a look. There, in a boat almost directly under a bridge that ran over the water, were Castile and De Croix, happily pointing out details of the wondrous scene. And, sitting ominously like disinterested statues on the seat directly in back of the South American presidents, Pitt could make out the 2 guards who'd been there when Rondheim had battered him to a pulp only 2 days before in Reykjavik. Kipman tugged at Lazard's sleeve.
This is your show, Dan. How do we take 'em?
No guns. The last thing we want is a stray shot killing a child.
Well, then we'll have to take a risk,
Kipman said. He wiped a handkerchief across his damp brow.
We'll get the boats moving again, then as soon as the one with our friends begins to cross under the bridge, we'll take 'em.
Okay, Lazard agreed. The bridge will give us enough cover to close within 5 feet. I'll work around and come out of that doorway under the grog shop sign. Kipman, you hide behind the mule and wagon. You need an extra hand? Pitt asked. Sorry, Major, you're hardly in shape for hand-to-hand combat. You could pull off a vital role, though. By standing on the bridge in your wolf costume and mingling with the pirates, you could distract those 2 in the boat long enough to give Kipman and myself a few more seconds of insurance. Pitt smiled ruefully. I guess it beats the hell out of matching wits with the 3 little pigs. Everyone took their positions. Pitt relieved one of the mannequins of its cutlass and was surprised to find that it was a steel replica of the real thing. Even at close range, he could only marvel at the true-to-life appearances of the mechanical pirates. The glass eyes, set in brown wax faces, stared unerringly in whatever direction the head was set, and the eyebrows raised up and down in unison with the lips as strains of 16 men on a dead man's chest boomed from speakers concealed within their aluminum frame bodies. Pitt moved to the center of the arched bridge over the canal and joined in the singing between 2 merry buccaneers who sat with their legs dangling over the fake stone parapet, swirling their cutlasses around in circles in tune with the songfest. Pitt, in his big bad wolf suit, and the frolicking pirates presented a strange sight to the people in the boat as they waved and sang the famous old seafaring ditty. Pitt saw the boat move. The bow was just passing under his feet when the shadowy figures of Kipman and Lazard leaped from their cover, sprinted through the mass of animated figures, and dropped into the rear of the boat. The surprise was complete. But Pitt hadn't noticed. No fuss, no elaborate flourish, no token words of warning. He coldly and efficiently shoved the blade of his cutlass under the armpit and into the chest cavity of the pirate sitting nearest him. A curious thing happened. The pirate dropped his cutlass. His lips contorted into a soundless oval, eyes registering astonishment and shock, a shock almost immediately replaced by a final awareness. Then the eyes turned up in the head, and he fell forward, splashing onto the now empty canal beneath the bridge. Pitt had one fleeting glimpse of a flashing metallic glint in the fiery light, and the instinctive slight inclination of his head saved his life as the second pirate's cutlass sliced through the crooked top hat that was perched on the wolf mask. Blindly fending off the lunging thrusts, staggering backward under the fury of the other man's assault, Pitt hurled himself convulsively sideways and over the parapet and plunged into the cool water of the canal. Even as he dived, Pitt had heard the swish of the pirate's blade as it hissed through the empty air where his body had stood only an instant before. And then there was the sudden shock as his shoulder collided with vicious force against the shallow bottom of the canal. The pain exploded in him, and everything seemed to dissolve and stop. Pulling himself onto the landing, Pitt stood up unsteadily, swayed, and only stayed upright by using the cutlass as a cane. The bridge was now empty. The second pirate was gone, and the boat was just disappearing around a curve into the next gallery. He turned in the opposite direction just in time to see another sightseeing boat approaching up the canal. All these things he noted mechanically, without consciously classifying their significance. All he could think of was that a killer was somewhere close by, disguised as one of the pirates. He felt helpless. The mannequins all began to look alike, and the action on the bridge had happened with such speed that he hadn't been able to perceive any details of the man's costume. A second later, he was half running, half stumbling along the quay, gasping at every step as waves of pain shot through every tendon of his body. He burst through a black curtain and into the next stage set. It had a huge domed chamber dimly lit for a nighttime scene. Built into the far wall, a scaled-down version of a pirate's corsair ship, complete with dummy crew and Jolly Roger rippling in a breeze, urged on by a hidden electric fan, fired simulated broadsides from replica cannons across 50 feet of water and over the heads of the people in the excursion boat. It was too dark to make out any details on the excursion boat. Pitt could detect no movement at the stern, and he felt certain that Kipman and Lazard had everything under their command. Everything, that is, that was within their reach. As his eyes began to penetrate the heavy darkness, he saw that the bodies in the boat were all huddled below the sides of the hull. He was about halfway up the maintenance ramp to the deck of the corsair ship when he heard a strange sound, the almost silent thump of a gun with a silencer. Suddenly he was standing in back of a form in a pirate costume who was holding something in his hand and pointing it at the little boat in the water. He raised the cutlass and brought the flat side of the blade down on the pirate's wrist. The gun vanished over the railing and into the water below. The pirate swung around, the white hair falling from under a scarlet bandana that was knotted around his head, the cold, blue-gray eyes flashing with anger and frustration. "Ah, so it is you, Oscar." Pitt paused significantly, watching Rondheim like a cat. Holding Hermit Limited's chief executioner on the end of a cutlass, Pitt pulled off the rubber wolf's head. "It's not possible." "I apologize for ruining your day, but it just goes to prove that you can't always trust a computer." "Then it's back to you and me again, Major. Under conditions more favorable to you than those I enjoyed in my home." Pitt hurled his cutlass over Rondheim's head and into the water and stood back. "Now we're even." An uncertain smile came to Rondheim's mouth as he crouched into a karate stance. The smile didn't last. Pitt hit him with a right cross, a perfectly timed punch that jerked Rondheim's head sideways and staggered him into the ship's mainmast. Rondheim sprang from the mast and threw a kick to Pitt's head, missing by a scant inch as Pitt ducked easily away. The ill timing cost him. Pitt caught Rondheim with a series of left jabs and another short, hard right that sent him to his knees on the deck, holding a hand to the broken, bleeding nose. Mouthing a string of curses through blood-speckled lips, His face now frozen in insane hate, Rondheim flung himself at Pitt. He hadn't taken a second step when Pitt rammed an uppercut as solidly as a sledgehammer into Rondheim's teeth. For 2 or 3 seconds, Rondheim seemed to straighten and stand there poised like a frame frozen in a movie projector. Then, with the unbelievably slow, irrevocable finality of a falling tree, he crumbled to the deck and lay still. It hardly seemed like 2 hours since Pitt had showered and shaved and eaten his first solid meal since leaving Reykjavik. The doctor was quite definite that he'd go to a hospital, but Pitt wouldn't hear of it. I'm grateful for your professional concern, but there's one more act to play out. 2 hours, no more. Then I'll dedicate what's left of my body to medical science. Kipman's men had been careful not to alert Kirsty Fear or give her the slightest warning of Rondheim's fate or the sudden demise of Hermit Limited. Pitt made his way to her hotel suite, entering through Rondheim's connecting room. All the rooms in her suite were empty except the bathroom. The sound of running water told Pitt that Kirsty was in the shower. He walked over to the bar and poured himself a scotch on the rocks. 20 minutes and 2 drinks later, Kirsty emerged, wearing a green silk kimono, loosely sashed at the waist. She looked incredibly fresh and lovely. She walked through the bedroom and into the living room, and was in the midst of mixing herself a drink when she saw Pitt's reflection in the mirror behind the bar. She stood there paralyzed for a moment, and then turned to face him.
"Dirk, it's you. It's really you. Thank God you're still alive."
Your concern for my welfare comes a little late. Bonnie Parker and Lucretia Borgia both could have taken lessons from you on how to kill friends and influence enemies.
"I had to do what I've done, but I swear to you I have killed no one. I was unwillingly pulled into the vortex by Oscar. I never dreamed that his association with Kelly would lead to death for so many."
You say you've killed no one, but you're lying.
"What are you talking about?"
You killed Christian Fury. She looked at him as if he'd gone mad.
"You can't mean what you're saying. Christian died on the lakes. He was burned to death."
The time had come, Pitt told himself, to settle the account, balance the entries, tally the final score. He leaned forward. Christian Fury didn't die a fiery death on a ship in the North Atlantic. He died under a surgeon's scalpel on an operating table in Veracruz, Mexico. Kirsty's mouth had fallen open. She closed it quickly and numbly searched for something to say.
"Why do you torture me by beating around the bush? Why don't you come out and say it?"
Say what? That you're really Christian Fury? That there never was a sister? That Christian died at the exact moment you were born? You weren't satisfied with the hand nature dealt you, so you had a sex change? What more is there?
"You can never know, Dirk. You can never know what it is like to lead a frustrating and complicated existence, playing the strong, virile male adventurer on the outside, while inside you are a woman longing to be free."
Well, I've met a few slick operators in my short lifespan, but by God, Kirsty or Christian or whoever, you have got to be the shrewdest bastard, or rather bitch, that ever came down the pike. You took everyone. You conned Admiral Sandecker into thinking you were going to turn the undersea probe over to our government. You faked 1,000 men and their ships and aircraft into a wild goose chase, searching for a ship that was never missing. You beguiled Dr. Honeywell, an old friend, into identifying a charred body as your own. You used Fury Limited's personnel, and they died carrying out your orders. You used Rondheim. You used Kelly. And you even tried to use me in the hope that I might erase Oscar. It's too bad the bubble had to burst. Kirsty had moved slowly around to a small traveling case on an end table, lifted out a tiny Colt .25 automatic and leveled it on Pitt's chest.
"Your accusations are not nearly as neat and organized as you think. You're groping, Dirk, like a blind man."
Pitt glanced at the gun and then nonchalantly turned away and ignored it. "Well, suppose you show me the light." She looked uncertainly at Pitt, but still she held the gun as steady as a statue.
"I had every intention of turning the undersea probe over to your country. My original plan was to put my scientists and engineers on board the Lax and send them to Washington for the presentation ceremonies. Then, on the voyage across the North Atlantic, Christian Fury was to have been lost overboard.
In the meantime, you'd flown to Mexico for the operation.
Yes, but a totally unexpected and unforeseen coincidence spelled disaster to the new life I had so carefully planned. My surgeon was a member of Hermit Limited.
So he blew the whistle and informed Rondheim. Kirsty nodded.
From that moment on, I was Oscar's slave. He threatened to expose my transition to the world if I didn't turn my business resources over to him and Kelly. I had no choice. If my secret had become known, the resulting scandal would have wrecked Fury Limited and shattered the economy of my country.
But why the masquerade with the Lax?
Now that Oscar and Kelly controlled me, they were not about to let the sea probe out of their hands. So they created a fraudulent story about the Lax's disappearance. You must admit it was an efficient situation. To the world, the sea probe was lost on the bottom of the sea.
And so was Christian Fury.
Yes, it also served my purpose.
Well, that doesn't explain the alteration to the Lax's superstructure. Why wasn't the sea probe simply removed and installed on another ship?
The sea probe is a complicated piece of equipment. A ship must literally be designed around it. To have taken it from the Lax and reinstalled it in a nondescript fishing trawler would have taken months. And while everyone was searching for her, the Lax was secretly being facelifted in a cove on the eastern cove of Greenland.
And Dr. Honeywell, how did he figure into the picture?
He worked with me developing the probe.
Why, no, but why you? Why not with someone in his own country? She looked at him and studied his face for a long moment.
I paid for the research and the development with no strings attached. The technological corporations in the United States wanted to tie up his services and all his experimental results. Dr. Honeywell despised doing anything that reeked of commercial profit.
Yet he became associated with Kelly and Hermit Limited.
When the Lax was prospecting the seafloor of Greenland, the probe malfunctioned. Dr. Honeywell was the only one with the technical knowledge to suggest a quick repair, and Kelly flew him there from California, a very persuasive talker, that F. James Kelly. He sold Dr. Honeywell on joining Hermit Limited to save the world. The doctor couldn't resist. He was always what you Americans call a do-gooder. He came to regret his decision, and he died for it.
Well, that explains the fire on the ship. You underestimated Dr. Honeywell. He didn't fall under the spell of Kelly. He saw through the whole dirty scheme. He didn't like what he saw on the Lax, Rondheim's crew holding your scientists prisoners. Yeah, it's even likely your people on the ship slipped him the facts on Dr. Matajic's and his assistants' deaths. Honeywell knew then he had to do something to stop Kelly, so he wired the probe, timing it to self-destruct after he was in the air and on his way back to the States, only he made a mistake. Something even he didn't understand about the reactive elements of seltinium caused it to ignite and not only destroy the probe but the entire ship and the crew as well. I was there when he set foot on the Lax again. I saw the stunned expression on his face when he realized what he'd done.
It's my fault. It's all my fault. I am to blame. I should never have divulged Dr. Honeywell's name to Oscar and Kelly.
Kelly guessed what had happened and ordered Rondheim to silence Honeywell.
He was my oldest friend, and I signed his death warrant.
Did he know about you?
No. Oscar simply told him I was in the hospital recuperating from an illness.
He was a better friend than you know. He falsely identified a body on the Lax as yours. Dr. Honeywell did it so the Christian Fury he knew wouldn't be implicated when he went to the authorities and spilled the damaging facts about Hermit Limited. Unfortunately, evil triumphed over good. Rondheim got to him first. Pitt shook his head sadly and sighed. Then entered Dirk Pitt, stage left.
That's why I insisted on meeting you. I had to express my gratitude for your attempt to save his life. I am still in your debt.
It's too late. Makes little difference now.
It does to me. That's why I saved you from being beaten to pieces by Oscar. But I can't save you a second time. I must protect myself, Dirk. I'm sorry. Please do not move and make me pull the trigger. You must wait until Oscar arrives.
Pitt shook his head again. Don't look for Oscar to come bounding in here to rescue you. At this moment, your ex-slave master is lying unconscious, encased in half a ton of plaster in a hospital bed. surrounded, I might add, by a bevy of national intelligence agents. They may have to push him to the gallows in a wheelchair, but walk or ride, he will surely swing.
What do you mean?
It's done. It's over with. You're free. Hermit Limited and its management just went belly up.
I want to believe you, but how can I?
Pick up the phone and call Kelly, Marks, Von Hummel, or your friend Rondheim.
But what of me? What? Am I to be arrested also?
No. The NIA knows of your new status. They put two and two together and figured out that Rondheim was blackmailing you. They considered taking you in as an accomplice, but I talked them out of it. The gun was gently laid on the end table. An awkward silence descended. Finally, Kirsty stared at Pitt and said,
There is a price. There is always a price.
All I want is your guarantee for close and continued cooperation between Fury Limited and NUMA.
And?
The memory banks in Kelly's computers contain enough data to build a new undersea probe. I speak for Admiral Sandecker when I say he would like you to head up the project.
That's all? Nothing more?
Pitt nodded. She gazed levelly at him.
Tomorrow, next week, the coming year, how can I be sure you will not decide to raise the interest rate?
Pitt's eyes turned cold. Don't put me in the same league with your other playmates. Mass murder and extortion have never turned me on. Your secret is safe with me, and it's even safer with the NIA. They'll see to it that Rondheim and Kelly will never get within 50 feet of a press reporter. She hesitated.
I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. What else can I say?
He didn't answer, just looked at her. She came toward Pitt and stood in front of him. A knowing smile curled her lips. She raised her hand, and her fingers lightly touched his battered face.
All will be as you ask. Tomorrow I will see Admiral Sandecker and affirm our mutual efforts. I must, however, extract a small cost in return.
And that is? She loosened the sash and shrugged the kimono from her shoulders to the floor, standing there in the relaxed classical pose of the nude. Under the light from the lamp, her features and body could only be described as magnificent, a perfectly constructed monument to the miracle of medical science. Pitt looked her straight in the eye. No, thank you, Miss Fury. When you became a woman, unfortunately, you also became a cold, shrewd, calculating witch.
No.
Christian Fury was a warm, honest lover of humanity. Your change was emotional as well as physical. People to you are only to be used, to be thrown away when their usefulness ends. You're cold and you're sick. She shook her head.
No, I've changed, yes, but I'm not cold. Not cold.
She held out her arms.
Let me prove it.
Pitt turned away and opened the door. He looked back at Kirsty. God save thee, he said, and shut the door behind him as he left.